Councilor. Today is Tuesday, April 23rd, and we are here with members of the administration and my colleagues to start the FY19 review of the City of Boston's recommended budget. I'd like to remind folks that this is a public hearing, both being recorded and broadcast on Comcast Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and Verizon 1964, and streamed at boston.gov/city-council-TV. I'd ask folks in the chamber to silence their electronic devices. At the conclusion of the presentation and questions and answers from my colleagues, we will take public testimony. There is a sign-in sheet to my left by the door entering the chamber. We ask that you write down your name, any affiliation and residence, and please check the box if you do wish to testify. This budget review will encompass over 36 hearings over roughly the next several weeks. We strongly encourage residents, whether here in the chamber or at home, to take a moment to engage in this process by giving testimony for the record. You can do this in several ways. Come to one of the 36 hearings and give public testimony. Come to the hearing dedicated to public testimony on Tuesday, June 5th, anytime from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. We will be here at least for that time frame, and we'll stay as long as we need to hear everyone who would like to speak on the budget. Send your testimony via email to ccc.wm@boston.gov or by letter, 5th floor, Boston City Hall, 1 City Hall Plaza, Boston 02201. We are here, as I mentioned at the outset, to review the FY19 budget as they apply to dockets 0559 through 0563. Orders for the FY19 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations, annual appropriations for the school department, appropriation for other post-employment benefits, also known as OPEB, appropriation for certain transportation and public realm improvements, and appropriations for certain park improvements. Also dockets 0564, 0565, capital budget appropriations, including loan orders and lease and purchase agreements. In order of their arrival, I will introduce my colleagues. To my immediate left, City Councilor at Large Anissa Sabi George. To my immediate right, City Councilor at Large Michael Flaherty. To my left, Councilor Ed Flynn, Councilor Frank Baker, Councilor Tim McCarthy, Councilor Lydia Edwards, and to my right, Councilor Josh Zachem, Councilor Andrea Campbell, and Councilor Kim Janey. I'd like to remind my colleagues, I sent out an email last week just asking for everybody's cooperation, especially on the first round. We'll probably have, a lot of participation. In the first round, if we could keep question and answer combined to 5 minutes, it might only allow for the one question in round one, but it's just to give everybody an opportunity. Round two, we'll give you 10 minutes, and we'll go from there if you need to stay. A lot of times, people will find that questions are answered and asked and answered by others throughout the process. So I appreciate your cooperation in that. And with that, I want to introduce Justin Sterrett and Emmy Haw from the Budget Office. Thanks for being here today.
Good morning, Chairman Siomal and members of the City Council. My name is Emma Handy, and I'm the Chief of Administration and Finance and CFO for the City of Boston. I'm also joined by the city's budget director, Justin Sterrett, who will review the details of the operating and capital plans as we proceed through this. On behalf of the mayor, I'm here to present the FY19 operating budget and the mayor's FY19 through FY23 capital plan. At $3.29 billion, the operating budget is balanced, sustainable, and accelerates the progress across our city. The plan continues the mayor's commitment to fiscal responsibility while making impactful investments in our schools, our neighborhoods, and our people. Mayor Walsh has prioritized strong fiscal management, which has led to the city's first AAA bond rating in 2014, and which rating agencies have continued to affirm in each year after that. The confidence of the rating agencies stems from decisions by the Welch administration over the past 5 years, which are, again, key pillars of this budget proposal. And these include things like tackling our long-term liabilities by fully funding the city's pension schedule by 2025, which is 15 years earlier than required, making huge strides each year towards funding that schedule. In FY19, the budget includes $238 million for pension costs, which is a $17 million or 8% increase from FY18. We're also making important progress on funding the city's OPEB costs for retirees. We've funded over $400 million of OPEB costs to date, and we'll commit another $40 million in this FY19 proposal. We've made continued progress in identifying ongoing cost savings. We've saved over $50 million over 5 years in healthcare costs through implementing municipal healthcare reform and collaborating with the city's Public Employee Committee, and avoided $12 million in costs in FY19 specifically. We continue to identify position and overtime savings so that we can reinvest those dollars into programs like housing, public safety, and other essential city services. And we've made city services more effective and data-driven and enhanced the city's local receipts through more coordinated billing and coordinated analysis. The mayor has balanced the budget and provided for investments in an environment of declining net state aid and continued uncertainty at a federal level. In FY19, we predict that net state aid will decline by $20 million from FY18. This is the product of rising state assessments for charter schools in the MBTA against stagnant state education aid in particular. At the same time, we are investing $48 million of new funds for the Boston Public Schools. As the mayor mentioned, the charter school assessment will increase by $20.5 million in FY19. This is something the mayor talks about a lot because it has such a dramatic impact on our ability to fund city services and to be able to prioritize new investment for both school spending as well as other budget items. We project that charter reimbursement will decline from the state by actually almost $2 million based on the governor's budget. Due to the strong Boston economy and related property tax growth of 5%, we have been able to fill the state aid gap while also affording investments in education and other areas of the budget. But with declining state support, our reliance on property taxes grows every year. In FY19, property taxes will exceed 70% of budgeted revenues for the first time. We must prepare for future downturns by continuing our sound fiscal management and by strongly advocating for our fair share of funding from our state and federal partners. And we know that this approach can work and will work. In FY18 and in the FY19 House budget, we've received additional money for charter reimbursement. So we think this is the product of strong advocacy by both the mayor and members of this council and members of the Boston community at large who are advocating for additional state funding to help us be able to support investments in education and other city services. This budget does include historical levels of funding for progress, opportunity, and innovation across the city, including new supports for funding schools to educate and prepare all Boston children for success, specifically $10 million of new funding directed for schools with the greatest need, including more nurses, social workers, and more social emotional staff for Boston Public Schools. The budget builds on the city's successes in creating affordable housing through the creation and preservation of affordable housing stock, and it also makes targeted new investments in programs that appear for the first time in this FY19 budget to keep people in their homes. The budget includes new resources for youth substance abuse prevention, the Permanent Engagement Center on the front line of responding to substance use disorder, and the opioid epidemic, and new capital dollars to rebuild the Long Island Bridge to advance the recovery campus that will be located there. The budget includes new classes of police officers, EMTs, and firefighters, which will allow us to provide more police and EMTs to our streets. And it also allows us to equip our fire, police, and EMTs with 21st century technology to help meet our public safety needs. The budget includes new transportation revenue, which is essential to allow us to advance the priorities identified in Go Boston 2030 and will allow us to take huge strides forward in implementing the plans as laid out in that goal. We will be able to build 15 new slow streets, create 15 more miles of protected bike lanes, and improve 15 of our most problematic intersections, as well as several other important investments that are funded by those new transportation revenues. And that is my summary of what are the highlights of the FY19 operating budget plan. I will turn it over to Justin, who is going to review the plan in more detail, including revenue, spending, and also the capital budget.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, councilors. This should be a somewhat familiar deck to you guys, but I definitely want to touch on some areas, and we look forward to engaging with you both in this hearing and in future hearings to answer any questions that you may have along the way. So obviously, feel free to make use of my office and Emma's office to answer questions, and we look forward to getting into it. So the first thing I'll touch on quickly is the fiscal responsibility that Emma mentioned. It's really the linchpin that makes every investment and everything that we're able to do as a city possible. In FY19, we're going to continue that process by making sure that we're really prioritizing sort of responsible budgeting and sort of living within our means, cost containment, and taking those cost containment and reinvesting it into new programs, data-based decisions to make sure that every decision we make has a return on investment in the sense that we're getting better services, more city services, or improved city services with every new dollar we spend. Maximizing revenue, this is both from a maximizing the revenue that we already have and then pursuing new revenue opportunities like Emma mentioned with transportation. Long-term planning, fully funding our pension by 2025 it'll be a very worthwhile and meaningful investment over the next 6 or 7 years, but it's something that the bond rating agencies really look favorably on. It's something that puts us 15 years ahead of our statutory requirement by the state legislature. And then finally, just strong and proactive fiscal management throughout the year, making sure that we're reacting to things as we see them coming through and making sure we're living within the approved budget at the end of the day. So major trends that we see for next year, robust property tax growth. We will be budgeting on $55 million in new growth for next year. That's the highest we've ever budgeted on as a city. You'll see when we get to a few of the later slides, that's a little bit less than what we've seen as actuals in the last 2 years, but we would say that those are far and away the highest amounts we've received in decades, if not more, if not ever, to be perfectly honest. Increased local receipts, both from a booming economy and from additional permits, and as well as some targeted fee increases. And then we do have on there, which Emma mentioned before as well, the plummeting net state aid is really an issue we'll get into a little bit. We have seen, as Emma mentioned, progress in the House and House Ways and Means budgets that were released. It's definitely a reflection of continued strong advocacy, both publicly and up on the Hill, and we appreciate that. But while revenue is growing next year by about $137 million, we do expect a lot of that growth to be eaten up by either our fixed costs, our maintenance budget of making sure that we can pay for our existing city services, including health insurance and debt service from an expanding capital plan. We're growing the capital plan next year, which means that we're going to have greater debt service associated with that, so that's something that's eating up some of that growth. So here we have the FY19 revenue picture. So you'll see on there, for the first time, property tax will tick over 70% of the city's budget, which is kind of a reflection of two things, both a decreasing state aid and a robust local economy, growing the development market. 15 years ago, state aid used to amount for 30% of our budget, which makes that reliance on property tax and making sure that our other local revenues, we're collecting what we are owed, and then we're making sure that we're making targeted changes to that. Here we have property tax growth over the last 15 or so years, actually 10 or so years. And you'll see that while in FY18 it does look like it's decreasing, it is actually the highest we ever budgeted on as a city. And because it is a very cyclical resource, it's not something that we can rely on for the future, as Emma mentioned. $77 million last year and $75 million the year before that are actually high watermarks for us. So it's something that we want to be very careful and not become over-reliant on. But as you can see, property tax as a whole is growing pretty substantially. Net state aids, we wanted to spend a few more minutes on net state aid to tell you sort of exactly what that means. So when we say we're losing $200 million annually, that means if you were to go back to 2008, we were collecting about $350 million from the state. That number next year will be closer to 150. So on a 10-year average or a 10-year basis, we're collecting $200 million less than we used to be collecting from the state. So that's something that we've seen as a downward trend, and as I'm sure many of you are familiar with, that comes from a really a fundamental shift in the way we collect education aid as the city. Okay. Sorry about that. If you don't mind, I might go to the other side. Yeah.
While Justin's doing that, let me introduce Counselor at Large Michelle Wu has joined us, as well as District City Councilor Matt O'Malley. There you go.
Thank you.
Oh, it just went back.
Okay, great, thank you. Sorry about that. So, net state aid, that's this chart here, something that we've been using in sort of our talking points right now. That blue line is what we get from the state in terms of education aid. So that's Chapter 70, that's charter reimbursement. That red line is our charter school assessment, and that's what we owe back to the state for all the students in Boston that go to charter schools. And that green line is what the state essentially sends us for educating 55,000 BPS students. And as you can see, it's obviously been on a sort of precipitous decline over the last 5 or 6 years. And then in the very near future, 2 or 3 years from now, we will receive no state aid from an education point of view. And that's something that, you know, we've sort of been grappling with over the last few years, and something that even though we've had to sort of fill in that net state aid gap through additional property tax and sort of making investments, it's something that we sort of still see on the horizon and something we want to make sure that we're still advocating for. As I mentioned before, state aid used to represent about 30% of the city's budget, and now only represents about 14%. That makes a property tax and sort of not becoming overly reliant on property tax really important moving forward. The last revenue piece I'll touch on quickly is local receipts. So we do have a growing economy here in Boston, so excise taxes, including meals and room occupancy, are increasing next year. Parking fines proposal that the mayor put forth about 3 weeks ago at this point is $5 million in new parking fine changes that will be directly invested back into transportation projects like Emma mentioned. We also do project to receive money for both the first time from recreational marijuana and for the second year, the TNCs. We have not received our FY18 funding for the TNCs from the state, but we anticipate that coming in the next few months or so. So that's something that we, as a growing and sort of emerging economy develops here in Boston, something that we are going to benefit from moving forward. And then finally, when we're maximizing our sort of existing revenue streams, that's making sure that we're using data-driven analysis to collect the money that we're owed, monitoring collections and billings to making sure that people that do owe us are sort of getting timely notices in time, and then better optimizing our non-tax revenue sources to make sure that departments have the capabilities and the tools and the softwares to collect the fees that they're owed. So I'm going to move over to spending. This chart kind of reflects where the big buckets of funding go for the city. Education continues to represent about 40% of the budget. City departments like public safety, streets, and other departments represent about 32%. Fixed costs, including debt service, pensions, and other assessments that we owe to the state, make up about 17%. Next year's $3.29 billion budget will grow by about $137 million. It's a 4.3% increase over FY18. Continues to dedicate $48 million more to the Boston Public Schools and $20 million more to charter schools. It also dedicates about $637 million for public safety. Included in the budget next year, also $12 million in data-driven investments that departments throughout the hearings over the next few months will certainly highlight for you folks. And then finally, every budget is dependent on sort of maximizing our existing resources and making sure that we're paying for our debt and paying for our long-term obligations. And this budget continues the work that the Walsh administration has done, including pursuing savings at BPS, in transportation, central office. We're able to announce 2 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago at this point, we were able to identify about $2 million in savings at BPS through their health insurance. And instead of sort of reallocating that money elsewhere in the budget, we took that and directed it directly back into a new investment in nurses and Selwell, as I mentioned. The city also continues to benefit from health insurance changes through the PEC contract. It's going to save the city $50 million over 5 years, which is great. That's money that we've been able to reinvest. We continue to review long-term vacancies and identifying those in the budget and then either reinvesting those savings into other positions or other investments that departments are looking to make. Reviewing energy and fuel pricing continues to benefit the city. And then finally, for the second year, we'll be bringing street sweeping in-house for 2 districts that proved to be more efficient last year in FY18, and we're going to double down on that for next year. I'm just going to quickly touch on our long-term liabilities here. As I mentioned, The pension continues to eat up a larger portion of the budget every year. It's growing by about 17 million or 8% next year. That's funding that, while it is one of the larger increases that we do have for next year, it's really important for the city to maintain its bond rating and keep our debt borrowing costs low so that we continue to expand and grow the capital plan. So I'm going to move over to some of the highlights of the investments. Superintendent Chang and the team over there are seeing a $48 million increase, with $40 million of that funding going directly back to schools to best serve the students that they have. It's a $170 million increase since FY14. It's about 18%, so it's certainly one of the larger increases since the Walsh administration has been in office. And 40 million of that, or 10 million of that, are actually going to go to our highest performing or our highest need schools, with the students that are ELL, high levels of poverty, and have the most demands. There's a $10 million investment here to really focus on that. So quickly touch on a few other ones. I mentioned Selwell. I mentioned the $10 million for the highest need students. We're also going to expand district-wide programs next year, like Becoming a Man, Excellence for All, and Curriculum for English Language Learners. That's about $1.7 million. High-impact technology and training for both teachers and educators, $2.2 million. And then finally, the bulk of the increase goes to about $31 million for teacher compensation and teacher salaries to make sure that the teachers that we have here in Boston remain some of the most well-paid in the country. Going quickly to public health and safety. Police is a 30 officer increase to the class next year. It's be the largest force in a decade. It'll be about 20 new cadets next year in a new program to make sure there's a successful and diverse pipeline of new officers to join the academy. And then finally, $2 million towards the phase-in of body cameras for next year. At the fire department, we have investments in technology, safety, wellness, equipment. This includes $48 million in the capital plan to build 2 brand new state-of-the-art firehouses, engines 17 and 42. That'll include really cutting-edge life safety enhancements to make sure that the firefighters that are out there, fighting fires every day, come back and they have the safety enhancements that they need to remain safe. And then finally, EMS, we have 20 new EMTs to grow the size of the force and get down to a 6-minute priority time citywide. Transformational investments in our streets. As Emma mentioned, the mayor proposed a $5 million change to the parking fine structure, with all $5 million of that going right back into capital and operating budget improvements in city streets. That's 15 new slow streets, 15 new miles of city road that'll be redone next year, $2 million in roadway and sidewalk repairs, and then $1.5 million for walking, biking through an expansion of the Walkable Streets program, strategic bike network, and green links. It'll also include the city's first transit team to better coordinate with our partners like the T and TNCs, including dedicated bus personnel. That's really jumped out as a need, is to improve the bus service and the ability of the departments to manage the bus, to ensure efficiencies and bus service is getting the same type of treatment as the T and the Green Line. Addiction services. The mayor's investment in addiction services really spans 3 different things. It's a comprehensive approach through rebuilding the Long Island Bridge for the long-term recovery center that will go there, fully implementing the $1.8 million engagement center. This center, as I'm sure many of you know, is located in New Park. It's served hundreds of thousands of people so far this year, and it's certainly been a success. So there's $1.8 million in this budget to fully support that. And then finally, $250,000 for PHC to expand on their youth prevention and outreach work to really hit the spectrum of addiction services. Housing for all, as Emma mentioned, housing continues to be a priority for the administration. This budget not only invests in the long-term affordable housing stock, it also invests in preventing displacements and preserving tenancy through new supports, whether it's expanded legal services, flexible financial assistance for residents and tenants, and then finally, investing in new caseworkers, both for seniors and for renters, to make sure that they know their rights as they're navigating the city housing structure. It also includes $1 million for the middle income home ownership program, which will put dozens of new families into homes next year through zero interest down payment assistance from the city. Prosperity and equity. The mayor announced a few weeks ago some real progress that the city has made on prosperity and equity. In next year's budget, we'll continue that work through phase 2 of a disparity study, updating the economic inclusion and equity agenda, reviewing and supporting the Main Streets program, and then advancing the work of the Economic Mobility Lab. And I would say the biggest piece on that one would be tripling the digital equity grants to make sure that the 15% of Bostonians who do not have access to reliable internet at home can start to get that access. And then finally, something that we see coming down the pike a little bit, in 2020, the U.S. Census will begin. Actually, 2019, the U.S. Census will begin. But the city wants to make sure that we're represented accurately as a city, and this will include new funding to support personnel to make sure that every Bostonian is counted next year. Finally, a few more environment. I certainly don't have to tell you folks about the storms this winter. Climate change is real, and it's having more of an effect on the lives of residents. This budget takes real near-term actions like purchasing deployable flood walls in East Boston, and implementing nation-leading city ordinances like community choice aggregation and single-use bags. But it also keeps our focus on the future by providing new funding for updating our award-winning climate action plan. Parks remain the centerpieces of so many neighborhoods, and they'll receive increased funding in FY19. This includes updates for turf fields and ball fields and a slate of renovations of neighborhood parks. The city will also begin planning around the revitalization of our two of our signature parks, Franklin Park and the Common, where master planning efforts to redevelop those parks will take place in the next few months, or start in the next few months and continue into FY19. Finally, touching on a few last ones before the capital plan. Arts and culture, the capital plan contains the second year of the Percent for the Arts program. It's another $1.7 million for a dedicated, for a new project manager, but also for $1.7 million for public art commissioning in next year's budget. Libraries continue to be a centerpiece of this, and we'll see revitalized new libraries begin construction the next year, including Adams Street, Roslindale, Dudley, Fields Corner, and Uplands Corner coming down the pike after that. So finally, this Thursday, the mayor will be formally announcing the capital plan at Franklin Park. Yeah, thanks. Awesome, thank you. We look forward to folks being there. The city's capital plan is the 5-year plan to invest in roads, bridges, schools, libraries, and all city assets that the city owns to make sure that we're providing the best quality services that we can provide. The FY19 through 23 Imagine Boston Capital Plan continues those efforts and invests in the programs that were identified in the master planning efforts like IB 2030, Build BPS, Climate Ready Boston, Go Boston 2030, as we've mentioned before. The capital plan is a $2.4 billion plan when you take in every single source. So that's the city geo bonds, that's federal funding that we receive, and all other grants that we receive. About 39% of that goes to transportation, with over half of that funding coming from leveraging federal resources. 24% of the plan is for schools, and that includes fully committing to the $1 billion commitment in Build BPS over the next 10 years. So far in 2018, the first year of the Build BPS commitment, we're on track to spend over $100 million. So that's certainly on the way to fully committing that $1 billion commitment. And then when you include all sources, our capital plan invests heavily in our school buildings, our transportation infrastructure, roads, bridges, sidewalks. It includes $80 million in funding for the rebuilding of the Long Island Bridge. Thank you. As you can see, and this map is actually available on the budget website as well, so feel free to take a look at that. That includes programs in every neighborhood. It also includes investments in parks and a host of other vital areas. You can see that they touch pretty much everywhere in the city. So with that, I'll close, and I'll encourage you to check out our website, budget.boston.gov. We'll be able to dig deeper into the budget, see an interactive map with capital projects in your neighborhoods, and read a series of featured analysis cards that will provide a richer understanding of the investments we are recommending. You'll also find a new video for FY19 that reviews the city's budget process and how it makes an impact on every resident. And then finally, we look forward to our discussions in the coming months. We'll be here early and often for the next 3 months, and we look forward to answering your questions, as I mentioned before. But as far as an overview goes, that's essentially where we're at, and Emma and I are both happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Justin. I mean, first, let me thank Central staff especially for getting us to this point. It's quite a task to schedule the logistics of it, and I want to thank the administration for their cooperation, and particularly the mayor's commitment to sustainable and ever overreaching budgets, and not overreaching budgets, but sustainable and responsible budgets. One thing that jumps out is the property tax, and you know, my 10 years here, I think it was probably in the mid-60s is a percentage of the entire budget, and obviously, you know, it's more of a burden on the taxpayers and such. Do we see any, let me back up, and then we have, you know, the marijuana business, as you pointed out. What kind of revenue are we seeing or are we going to see from the Uber, Lyft, TNC market?
Sure. So the Uber, Lyft, TNC market, we've budgeted about $2.25 million for it for FY18. We expect to get about a similar amount next year in the FY19 budget. We will have some better data, and we'll get a better understanding of what we're going to get from Uber and T's over the next month or two when the state sends us our first FY18 payment, and it'll be a rolling process from there. So we're really kind of in a wait-and-see approach, so we level funded what the revenue assumptions were for TNCs for next year.
And, you know, we're hoping to get some legislation on the home sharing. Have you included any projections?
So no, we did not include any revenue projections for home sharing Airbnb.
Right. Okay, that's good to know. Let me pass it on to my colleague, Councilor Nisabi George.
Thank you, Councilor Siamo, and thank you for all the work that you've done and central staff and your team has done to get to us this point in the budget, kicking it off, and thank you both for being here. One of the things I think is most helpful in the budget process, or that I would find very helpful, still, you know, being fairly new to this process, is understanding the actual dollars spent, not just what we've approved over the last several budgets, so we can understand the trends and also understand the actual spending amount on, you know, both just the general budget, but then also on the schools and each of the big departments. So I'm wondering if we can get those numbers, the actual. So I know FY18 isn't ready yet, but there might be some anticipated numbers.
Yep.
But certainly for FY17, FY16, we could have some actuals.
Sure.
We can definitely get that to you, Councilor.
Great, thank you. And then I'm wondering about, when we consider the decline in state aid, what are our plans to both improve State House advocacy around lobbying for more state aid, or a return to at least a previous percentage? And then in order to do that, are we going to increase the capacity of IGR to do more of that lobbying? And what are our sort of general prospects of getting more out of the state?
Sure. So I think obviously right now is a particularly timely point in the calendar for us to be up at the State House having these conversations as they go through their own budget process, and that's something that the mayor and Justin and IGR and many others have been up there, and I know others that are here today, members of the council, have also been up there having those conversations. I think that obviously we've seen some good progress in their FY19 budget cycle in terms of some additional funding for charter and making that a priority, which I think, to be honest, had not been the case for the past several years. And so we will absolutely continue to have those conversations as the process moves over to the Senate side, and try to make sure that there's support within the governor's administration as well. And then I think calendar-wise, we look ahead to the end of this legislative session and trying to get action on several of the proposals that the mayor has filed that would be helpful to help us address funding in the formula, and also looking ahead to the next legislative session in terms of what are some shared priorities that might really help impact what the city is able to collect from state aid and state education aid in particular. Justin, would you add anything to that?
The only thing I would add is that the charter continues to be our biggest issue at the end of the day from a funding perspective. So it's something that has kind of been looked on, I think, from the state side as a very Boston-centric issue, but that's really changed in the last 2 years. Boston alone is down about $100 million in what we were owed through the charter reimbursement formula over the last 5 years, but that's about $300 million statewide. So there's about 200 or so other communities who are maybe not in the same magnitude of boat as Boston is, but you know, $25 million for us, that is our projected shortfall for this year. You know, $5 million for a city like Springfield or Worcester, that's a pretty similar sized portion of their budget at the end of the day. So we've seen some advocacy from other cities and towns to help move that needle forward. We think that continuing to see of this as a, you know, this is an issue that we've faced, and it's certainly affecting our bottom line, but this is affecting all communities citywide that have charters.
We send a lot of money up in the form of assessments to the State House. What, you know, do we have an opportunity at all to hold back on that? You know, the state has an obligation to,
Sure.
to fulfill its commitment to us, but how are we required to submit assessments to them?
Yep.
Can we hold back on them? Is there an opportunity to hold back and not write the state a check, whether it's the MBTA, whether it's the charter school piece? Where can we hold back, and can we do that?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, I think that's where the word net becomes particularly problematic for us, because the state essentially nets out our assessments from whatever revenue they ultimately send us. And so we don't, the funding actually never sits here to begin with before we, sort of pay that assessment. And so we don't have a great opportunity to not submit those. And so instead we've, I think, prioritized advocacy, like we said, with the State House, and continuing to have conversations when we think about things like our MBTA assessment. I think the Streets Cabinet has done a lot of great work in trying to coordinate more closely with the MBTA so that we continue to have strong partnerships and programming that is good for both the city and the state in terms of how we're engaging with the MBTA and helping to guide the programming there.
Well, so maybe a rhetorical question, and I'm up against my timer, but I wonder if there's ever an opportunity for legal action against the state because they aren't fulfilling their commitment to us as a city. You may have an answer to that. Perhaps we've looked at it.
So, I mean, I spent a fair amount of time up at the State House. Every bill and every law is written usually with subject to appropriation language. So while they made a commitment, and they made, I think, to charter schools is the 2010 Act that moved the achievement gap language forward. There was subject to appropriation language. So at the end of the day, it's on us as a city to continue to advocate for as much funding as possible on a yearly basis. But from a legal perspective, I think it's kind of a fine line, unfortunately.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Flaherty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to ask the breakdown between taxable property and tax-exempt property today, do you know what that is?
I don't have that, but I think I can get that pretty quickly for you.
Yeah, I'd like to have that answer, only because I know the focus is on the cuts to state aid, but if we ever experience an economic downturn, if we continue to see taxable property coming off the tax rolls, we're going to get sucker punched pretty big. So I just want to keep an eye on that. Happy to see you on page 11, city health insurance savings moving for nearly fully self-insured. Previous administration was actually upside down. We were self-insuring the older, less healthier population, and we were farming out the younger, healthier population. So looks like we're going to go full self-insured. Just food for thought. Maybe we do farm out sort of the older, less healthier folks for a cost savings. It's good to see that we've at least we've flipped it back to where it should be, but I would just give some food to thought that we may want to consider farming out the insurance on sort of the older population as a way to save some dough. Chiropractic services, I'm going to be looking real soon for a commitment from this administration with respect to chiropractic services being added to our health insurance. Not one that uses it. The thought of someone cracking my back or neck is frightening. However, from a lost man hour perspective, from a family medical leave perspective, from a sick time, and also from the opioid crisis, nothing better than getting an adjustment on your way to work as opposed to have to bang in and or start getting on the perks. Bad for business on a multiple levels. We need to take some serious thought where we have buying power, a lot of city employees, many of them operating heavy equipment. And again, for those that have it, maybe my colleagues have dealt with chiropractors, but what I do know is that folks bend down to tie their shoe, they can't get back up, and then have to take a month, maybe 6 weeks off of work, when they could just go get an adjustment. They're back up and running, they're back to work, no family medical leave, no time off, no nothing. So that has to be included at some point. I know that we're going to be coming up fairly new to renew, so that has to be a forefront of the argument, given our buying power. I know you've mentioned the $5 million. I just want to caution you not to rely on the $5 million on the parking fees. It's actually in my committee. I want to make sure that it won't come out of the committee the way it went in unless it includes some type of mechanism to reduce the handicap parking fraud and abuse. We lose out on millions of dollars, not a couple bucks, millions every year, because we turn a blind eye to folks from Rhode Island and New Hampshire coming into the downtown, throwing us the big middle finger, getting out of their car, and not paying the meter. So unless that provision provides for folks with placards to pay the meter like everybody else, I'm not going to increase meter fees for folks that are law-abiding and are playing by the rules. If we're going to scam and we're going to perpetrate frauds, so I just want to caution that. Unless that contains something to crack down on handicap parking fraud and abuse, that's not going to be $5 million. I'm just going to give it to you straight. Maybe it'll be half that, but we're not going to continue to jack up meter fees, nickel and dime people, but we're not going to address the real abuse, which also leads to circling the block. So if you want to take an environmental perspective on it, folks that are coming into town, they have to circle the block because everyone's perpetrating fraud. It's over the top. So now's the time that we're going to address that. Addiction, on the addiction stuff, I just want to make sure that no money is being appropriated to heroin or fentanyl injection sites. So are we on the same page on that?
I don't believe so, but I can certainly double check on that one.
Okay, that's looming around here, so, you know, which is a major concern. So if there's going to be funds going to addiction, I just want to make sure that they're not going to heroin and fentanyl injection sites.
The new
and then just on the-
investments, oh, sorry, Councilor.
Excuse me?
I was just
Amy?
going to say, the new investments around substance use in this budget are around prevention, the Long Island Bridge, and fully funding the permanent engagement center.
Gotcha. I just want to make sure when we're getting into the weeds and we're sort of combing
Yeah.
back that
We'll
we're not going
get
to
you
see like a
definitive
lump of
answer, but-
funds going to heroin and fentanyl injection sites somewhere. And if it's, I know we got a couple of suburban legislatures that have filed some put it out there. That'd be perfect. Put it out in their districts, see how that goes. We'll do a pilot program in their districts. If it works, we'll talk to them. But this isn't going to be a dumping ground over off of Mass Ave and Melnia Cass. And then just on the capital, and I'm sorry to be rapid firing, I know we're on a tight time frame here. On the capital, just want to see whether or not there's anything included for Moakley Park. It's one of, Joe Moakley Park, it's one of our largest and most heavily traversed and heavily used parks. It's a disaster. It's in horrible shape. I can speak obviously on behalf of my district colleague, Councilor Red Flynn as well. Was actually down there this morning. It's in real tough shape. And I know there's a little bit of a finger pointing. Some of it's the city, some of it's DCR. I'm happy to convene the meeting, order out for coffee, and try to resolve whatever those issues are. But there's definitely a capital need. And I think we're all sitting there waiting for, say, like UMass or Bob Kraft, or we're looking for some imaginative partnership. But in the meantime, it's just falling further into disrepair. And also give some thought to some type of first responder station, whether it's a fire station or a substation of some sort down the South Boston waterfront. The drain to the K Street and D Street Fire Department, the drain to C6, as well as the drain to EMS. It's between just the volume of people, the activity that's going on down there. So we have an issue with respect to concurrent jurisdiction. If that issue's ironed out and we get the 911 calls, you know, we're going to have to make a big investment down there. So maybe sort of a one-shop type of thing where we have a fire. We have fire apparatus, we have police, and we have EMS all housed down on the South Boston waterfront. But we own land down there, BRA, EDIC, and I'm good. Thank you.
Thanks. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor. I just had two quick questions. I know one of the highlights of the mayor's budget was the funding for the eventual reopening of Long Island. It's not only a city problem, it's a state problem, federal problem. But have we looked at, and as a probation officer for 10 years, I also visited Long Island weekly, visiting my probationers, and I commend the mayor on funding for Long Island. But have we also looked at, you know, the state and federal government, see what role they could play in helping fund it, as well as the business community in Greater Boston? And we're going to open up many marijuana facilities. Are we able to look at different revenue streams for Long Island as well?
I guess I can speak to the state portion. There was a earmark in there for the Long Island Bridge maybe 15 or 20 years ago. I think there were some questions about the ownership of the bridge, because I think it's a private bridge at the end of the day. But it's certainly something that we would be open to partnerships with both private businesses and other stakeholders.
How would you do any outreach to the business community in Boston, asking if they will play any role in terms of funding for the Long Island Bridge? It's, as I mentioned, it's a national issue, it's a state issue, certainly a city issue, but I think there's more that the business community can play, and working closely with city government in building the Long Island Bridge.
I think that, Councilor, the first priority of this budget was to ensure that the funding was there so that we could move forward expeditiously on planning for the bridge. You know, the funding in the bridge, in the budget, we think allows for a 3-year project that will allow us to get the bridge back up and running and start planning for the programming on the site, which will have to happen concurrently, so that we are able to have a plan in place when the bridge is finalized and opened. So I think certainly as part of that overall planning process, those are things that we'd be happy to look at and talk more about.
Thank you, and I know many of my colleagues, especially Councilor Baker and Easter Asabi George, have been working closely with the mayor on this issue and making sure that those that are suffering from substance abuse get the treatment that they need. So I just want to thank them for their hard work. As Councilor Flaherty mentioned, Moakley Park is a concern. It's one of the biggest parks in the city of Boston. There's also issues, as Councilor Flaherty mentioned, with jurisdiction and some flooding that's happening throughout the park as well. What's the long-term plan that you envision for Moakley Park?
Yeah, sure. So included in the plan is a study of the Moakley Park for flooding concerns. I think that both that and the 4-point channel become sort of the two areas that are the most sensitive to the next phase in flooding. We just did East Boston and Charlestown. This would be the next phase of it. The long-term capital construction of it is part of the larger Emerald Necklace project. And I can get the exact figures on how much we'll be investing in there, but there is, Moakley is included at least for some planning efforts right now.
Here in Moakley Park is surrounded by several public housing developments. It's used by communities of color, people in public housing, people throughout South Boston and Dorchester. But the baseball fields, the Little League fields, are in rough shape there. And I'd love to see something happen soon, you know, even for this year, for the start of the Little League program. Not just because my son plays baseball there, but so many kids do play baseball there. And it would be important for the young people of the community to play on a decent park.
Sure. We do have included in the operating budget for the Parks Department is last year the mayor piloted a ball field refresh program, so we could certainly take a look to see if it's on the list for next year or right now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. Thank you for coming out today. Justin, can you talk about a little more about the bridge?
Sure.
Is there a commitment in this budget for an actual dollar amount, and what will that dollar amount be, and what will that do for us?
Absolutely. So there is a commitment in real dollars in this bridge, in this plan. It's $50 million of the city's general obligation bonds, $30 million from the parking meter fund. It's a $92 million total project. As I'm sure you all are aware, there has been money appropriated in the past for the bridge. This would get the project built in 3 years, and it's something that the mayor is fully committed to doing, and includes, you know, withdrawing money from the parking meter fund this year to start that process to get into construction in 2019.
So to be in construction this year?
In calendar year 2019. So
Next year?
Yeah, second half of next year.
And you may or may not know the answer to this. What are the discussions with Quincy? How are we dealing with what's going on down there?
Sure, absolutely. Chris and Para from Transportation certainly can give you folks more details on that, but I would say that as of right now, it's city-owned land with good city-owned buildings on it that we currently have a right-of-way on. I think the plan is that we're proceeding to build this bridge.
Okay. But I think we should do it with some discussions with Quincy.
Absolutely.
And you said private bridge, so it's a private bridge but owned by the city of Boston, so we're the private owner. Okay. And with the engagement center, fully implementing an engagement center, is that, are we going to build an actual engagement center there? We'll get rid of the tent and a newer center. What else will be there that's not there now?
Sure.
Do you have any sense of that?
Oh, sorry. So, Councilor, the funding in the budget this year is just the first full year through an annual budget to support the engagement center that is there now. As is. But there is a funding in the budget to do a study of the site to plan for a permanent engagement center, and I think that will help answer some of those questions about what should be there and what types of supports and
So this
and
budget will
structure
just
needed.
fund what we have there, and then we're going to discuss whether if we build an actual building there with more services.
Right, it will fund what's there, and will also fund the ability for us to then do a structured study around what will be there.
Okay, and can you talk a little bit about, Justin or Emma, whoever wants to take it, we're talking about marijuana tax money and Lyft and Uber tax money. Let's start with Uber and Lyft first. What do you think is going to be there, and like how much are we getting from them?
Sure. So we've budgeted on $2.25 million. We will have a better sense of what our actual revenue is from the state in the next month or two. They'll be sending us our payment. So we did just budget on the $2.2 million for next year as well to keep it consistent. For marijuana, we're budgeting between 2 and 3 million right now.
For what year, though, with the marijuana? Because if everything is, the thing that I have with this is, all the marijuana is going to be medicinal for the first couple of years. I haven't seen anything recreational, so we're not going to get any tax money from that, correct?
So we use the same model that the state uses. They're projecting about $300 million statewide in recreational marijuana sales. So we extrapolated out that we would probably receive between $2 and $3 million of recreational sales. Now, I think it's anyone's guess whether that actually starts on July 1st, but I think for a fiscal year 19, we do expect some recreational marijuana revenue.
No, but nothing we can really sink our teeth into, though.
Right. I think for both the TNC and marijuana revenue, they're both emerging industries.
Yeah.
They are new, and I think the level of revenue reflected in the budget just reflects, I think, a little bit of uncertainty about where they both are headed in terms of how much they might actually generate for the city in terms of revenue.
We're not projecting on too much in the first couple of years is maybe what I'm trying to say. We're going to let it grow into that, and then we'll figure it out.
I think $2 million is a pretty conservative estimate based on what state DOR and state taxes have saying that they're going to collect. The state is budgeting at least $40 or $50 million total for them, so our $2 million that we're budgeting for is consistent with that.
So with that and I'll be done, this is my last, Mr. Chair, I know how you are. So this $2 million would be probably in 2 years or so.
We expect to get $2 million in FY19.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so with the July 1st start date of recreational sales, we expect to start collecting. I think it'll be exactly to your point until we start seeing the dollars come in.
But even if there's no recreational marijuana facilities in Boston, how are we going to collect that tax revenue?
We wouldn't until there were recreational shops that were open.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll
Thank
save
you.
the rest of my questions.
Thanks, Councilor Baker. Councilor McCarthy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome, and we'll see you all the way through July 1st, apparently. I've just got a couple, like, 30,000-foot questions. Part of the issue that Councilor Baker brought up with Quincy is very interesting with me. But the Uber and Lyft, we have an additional tax on hotels, Boston tax, correct? Do we have the power as a city or as a council to put an additional fee on Uber pickups and drop-offs that are in Boston? The reason being is that when we had Uber and Lyft in here, I don't know, 18 months ago, 24 months ago, they bragged about 40,000, 50,000 trips, 50,000 vehicles a day being in Boston. And I would argue that our biggest complaint as a district council, I'm sure, I think I can speak for everybody, literally is traffic, is our biggest concern. If we could get 50 cents extra a ride, that's 50 cents times 50,000 a day, Mark's the math guy, that becomes real money. Is there a way that we can add, whether through ordinance or home rule?
It's a great question. So right now, the way it works is we get 10 cents for every ride that originates in the city. So that's a state law. So at this point, I don't know what we could do as a city to supersede that, but it's certainly something we could take a look at.
Yeah.
See what the options are.
Yep, I'll start doing some research.
But I think we
on
were
it.
fully maximized. We fully expect to maximize that 10% or 10 cents per ride. So I think that's
Right.
what we're budgeting on.
Okay, but even if we can throw another 10 cents on?
Yeah.
Okay. So I really don't have it, because this is just the overview. I'm really happy with what District 5 is getting this year. The Rosendale Library was my big ask, and I appreciate that. Rosendale Library getting reconstructed. We're looking at $36+ million being sent over to District 5, whether it's Reservation Road or the George Wright Golf Course or the Mattahunt in Mattapan. So I was really happy with my priority asks, and I want to thank both of you as well as the mayor for listening. And obviously, we have a long road to hoe, so I'll keep that to the chiefs and the department heads as we go along from department to department. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilor Edwards.
Thank you both for coming here today, and also wanted to echo Councilor McCarthy's thanks in your efforts, especially in my district, and I want to thank the mayor for a lot of the capital investment in East Boston specifically. Would also like to put a plug for the capital investment in a senior center. I know that was one of our asks, and with the goal that it would be maintained by Massport. So this is, I think, an investment that's going to have it's going to pay off in its ROI because it's just a one-time payment from the city. But I also echo Councilor Siomo's concerns about how much of our budget is dependent on property taxes. Obviously, it's not recession-proof, so that if we do not have high skyrocketing property values, we're not going to have the 70% of our budget funded. Well, it will be funded, but just at a lower amount. So I'm just curious, and I wanted to walk through some of the other opportunities and ways and what you looked at for other revenues to help fund our city. The first was looking at how, at homelessness specifically, I know I think it's Honolulu, Hawaii, they looked at redefining chronic homelessness as a public health care crisis and have managed to get Medicaid dollars to pay for the rent and housing of their chronic homeless. I don't know if the city of Boston has looked at that. It's rare to get federal dollars, but that it could be under a different kind of stream to help with our homelessness. I'm wondering if there's been any attempt to do that.
We'll certainly want to check with PHC to get back to you on that specifically. I would say Boston, Massachusetts and New York City are essentially the only places in the country where you have a right to housing, so it does make our problem a little bit more challenging in some ways, but it's certainly something that we would always look to pursue other revenue opportunities, other federal grants, or Medicaid dollars if we're able to access that through PHC to fund the programs. So we can look into that.
Another source of funding that we have in the city is, of course, our pilot payments and making sure, I don't think any or very few of the universities are paying their full fair share of the 25% of the assessed value. I know that there's some sort of conversations going on to make sure that they do rise to the occasion. I think it's worth renegotiating with all of them for a higher pilot payment and actually coming up with an enforcement mechanism to make sure that we get our fair share from them. I also know that Massport pays $35 million possibly, and $18 million from just East Boston in pilot payments to the city of Boston, and we are renegotiating our contract with them. I'm hopeful to be at that table when you are negotiating with Massport to make sure that we're getting our fair share, so as those conversations go on, but also just to make sure that that is a vital source of funding with the amount of land that Massport has, especially in East Boston, and how many people come through East Boston in the city to get to Logan Airport. I really don't think $18 million is, well, I would say it's not as much as what we're giving, and I would love for the city to be a true advocate to make sure we're getting more from Massport.
Sure. Certainly on the pilot, Boston is by far and away one of the leaders in sort of that structure and having nonprofits like hospitals and universities pay anything at all. So it's certainly something we continue to partner with them on to understand both the real dollars that come back to the city, but then also what community benefits we might be getting. And that's something that we're continuing to look at as we make projections for next year. I think bottom line from the, budget perspective, we want to make sure that we maintain the pilot cash payments that come in and then understanding exactly what the community benefits are that they're claiming and that they are providing to the community.
Okay. And in terms of, you brought up resiliency, and again, I want to thank the mayor and your leadership for your investment specifically in East Boston, but it's not, again, with property taxes being in flux and resiliency and climate change not being in flux, we need to come up with a permanent structure to pay for it. Have you guys entertained looking at Boston Water and Sewage and possibly having a citywide pennies on the dollar kind of additional fee for resiliency to help the city pay for this?
I think it's not something that's included in the FY19 budget, and we continue to work with Chief Blackman to evaluate what the city's next steps are in terms of funding resiliency efforts, but it's something that we're happy to talk more about.
I just have two more. And then, or did you want to say something? And then with regards to our relationship, the city's relationship with the BPDA, I do know that a lot of they're self-funded. And so I'm just curious how some of that self-funding comes back to the city directly. Is there a way to, how the budgeting works in a relationship, and when they have Ray Flynn and I think the Navy Yard are two of their biggest, sources of funding. So tell me how the city is accessing, not accessing, is that separate from us?
Sure, it is separate in a lot of ways. We don't do an appropriation for the BPDA. We work with them, we partner with them for grants and understanding exactly what their resources are. But they're a self-funded agency at the end of the day. They get money from their tenancy, they get money from their development of property, and what they collect from developers through the BPDA process.
Is there any movement to start to turn on some sort of money or fee or to the city's general fund?
Not included in the FY19 budget.
Any conversation
We're happy
or
to-
thoughts?
We're happy to
Happy
talk
Okay.
more about it, certainly.
And then finally, when it comes to bonding, and due to our excellent AAA rating, we have an opportunity for another form of funding through our muni bond system. And having looked through some of the advisory letters, I think it was from the prior administration, from the legal department, housing had been excluded or interpreted as being excluded from our muni bond structure. And I think about that specifically because I see housing or muni bonds for housing as one of the untapped resources that we could be using, especially when we're talking about One Charlestown and the $1 billion that we're trying to raise through building luxury units to help pay for the deeply affordable ones. Has it been this administration's interpretation that housing also is not going to be funded by muni bonds?
Not something that I'm familiar with. I certainly could be just because I'm still learning. So we can look into that and get back to you, Counselor. I think one of the things that is a new resource that I think we've talked about before, but it didn't come up much today, is the Community Preservation Act in terms of its ability to help support new affordable housing. And there is CPA funds that are available in 18 and 19. So that is the newest resource that that's on the horizon for us to be able to put new money into affordable housing. But we'll look into that question and get back to you.
Since you brought up CPA, and I'll just finish with this, since you brought up CPA, you do realize there's an amendment pending to actually increase the state contribution for CPA. I was wondering if the administration what your advocacy has been to support that amendment.
It's not something we've looked at.
In the House budget, there is an amendment?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you have the amendment number, we can follow up, certainly.
I can get that to you.
Great, thank you.
Counselor, sorry, he's not here. Counselor Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor Siomo, for your leadership and the work ahead, and thank you also to central staff as well. And Justin and Emma, thank you guys and your teams. I know you guys don't do this work alone, for the work that you guys are doing, and we'll do through this process together. Just a couple of follow-ups on some of my colleagues. In terms of the numbers and what Councilor Sabe-George was asking, being able to look at the numbers, not just for FY19, but for FY18, and maybe even FY17 and 16, on pages 4, 10, and 23. They're percentages now, but could we actually have the numbers spelled out for those and also the previous years, and so we can compare the differences?
Yep.
And then I just want to echo Councilor Flaherty's point on the chiropractor. I'm so happy he brought it up. It's on my list as well. I actually occasionally do use the chiropractor, and this has come up from not only city employees on the council side, but also city employees in various departments as to why this isn't a service that's included in our insurance plan. So I'm attaching my name to whatever request that he has mentioned because it's really important. And also the handicap enforcement piece, that has also come up through different conversations, people abusing the system. And so I'd love to see what the administration's response is in terms of doing something about that. In terms of the capital plan, specifically each district councilor has a list of projects. Is there a way specifically for District 4 for me to get a sense of the timeline around those specific projects? Because I know, for example, some that are to be scheduled have been sitting there for a couple of years, and they're not in the millions. One is $100,000. It's a traffic study and a really busy area. So I'd be curious when that might happen. So if I could get a timeline attached to these projects, that would be great. Just quickly going, and I just also want to echo Councilor Edwards' point around the CPA. So something is pending right now, and it's an opportunity for us to get the state to increase the matching component of the CPA, which we all know is very important. So if you guys could add your name to that, that would be fantastic. Quickly, in terms of going back to Councilor Baker's point on Long Island, does this include any programming costs, or this is simply construction of the bridge, that $90 million?
The $90 million is simply for the construction of the bridge. There is additional funding to begin the study of what will need to happen at Long Island in terms of programming and buildings and things like that. But that is not included in that 92 million. That's a separate small bit of money.
So 92 million is for what you guys are including in FY19 for the construction of the bridge over a 3-year period?
That's right.
What's the allocation to explore what the programming could be?
It's $1 million in the capital plan as well, for PFD to work with stakeholders to determine what needs to go on out there.
Okay, and my larger sort of from the higher level is when determining these capital projects or how we, for example, use our parking fund for different projects. So I know the Long Island is 30 million from the parking fund. Is there a criteria or process by which we evaluate where we will spend that money? So whether it's pulling from a parking fund or something else, because the council obviously isn't privy to all these conversations. So I might say, I don't want the $30 million going to Long Island. I might want it to go to something else. So I'm just curious, what does that process look like in determining how much money should be pulled from a fund in the city to go to a specific project?
So I will say at a high level, all of our capital planning is done within the environment of the long-term planning that the administration has undertaken around Go Boston 2030, the Climate Action Plan, the Housing Plan, and Imagine Boston 2030. And so we do look at what our capital projects will be over the next 5 years in the context of these larger long-term planning efforts. Build BPS is another good example of something that we try to align to when we actually go in the annual budget process and program those dollars. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would just say, for FY19 through 23, about 85% of every dollar that we plan on spending will be a project that was contained in one of those master planning efforts that we have. So that's kind of the context that we do it. But then, exactly to your point, we then spend time, at the same time we're working on the operating budget, working with departments to try to figure out, okay, when is this project ready to go? What part of the design phase are they at right now? What part of the construction phase can they be at next year? And then try to allocate dollars in the right years to make sure that it's matching up with when there'll be shovels in the ground.
Is there anything sort of written out somewhere? So for example, in my office, just using this as an example, when determining whether or not I should donate to someone who reaches out to our office, and we get a lot of requests, if you can imagine, we sort of try to put together a criteria. Do you operate within District 4? How many people do you serve? What do you do? Do you have metrics to determine your success? So different things just to make it equitable, fair, transparent. Do we have any of these processes sort of written down, or is it really just looking at our current planning, whether it's the Boston Imagine 2030 plans, Build BPS, other things, and then sort of going into the conversation with just those plans?
So I would say we certainly look at the plans. There is a piece on the financing side, obviously, that becomes relevant in terms of, you asked specifically, how do we decide to use parking meter fund? I think part of that is around our debt affordability. We have a limit on how much we can borrow every year, and that's 7% of our annual budget. And so we do look at revenue opportunities like the parking meter fund to help, excuse me, offset against those general obligation bonds so that we are able to take on a myriad of projects and able to afford to make real progress on those long-term planning things that we've laid out.
Okay, I would just end by saying I think it's important that we think about what those processes look like, because if I'm obviously a citizen, I'm curious what they are. I mean, it might be I align with your thinking as to why, but just I'd love to see something that's actually written down that we can actually have a conversation with. Sure. Thank you guys for your hard work. Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Smith.
Thank you. Councilor Janey.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your hard work. Like my colleagues who've already spoken, who represent districts, I'm very grateful for the investment for District 7. Had some questions, just a few, because many have already been asked and answered. In terms of my own work, I really try to approach this through the lens of equity, and I'm hoping that you could go into a little more detail about how this budget, how the city is investing in a way that will make our city more equitable, particularly how it will help eliminate the racial wealth gap, how we are closing gaps and disparities in terms of race, income, and gender. And then I have some specifics that I would ask, but if you could just give that overview, that would be helpful.
Sure. I want to just say that I think one of the most critical ways that we are doing that is through the Boston Public Schools budget, and I will allow the experts at BPS, I think they'll be here tomorrow, to really dive into how they've approached that in the FY19 budget. I think Justin can add some color.
Can you
to that
talk
as well.
about the opportunity index? So one thing that has come up repeatedly, so this is an investment where we see concentrations of poverty or other needs, but other school communities have come to say, you know, it's always this issue of robbing Peter to pay Paul. And certainly I support the investment where we see this concentration so that we can eliminate gaps, but it's been a challenge as you know, parents and others have testified before the school committee on this issue. Can you speak to that, or should I wait?
I would just
for-
say, I think BPS certainly could probably say more and say it better than I can, but I think that as they've gone through the process, I think BPS has been very thoughtful about how they can both continue to look at what they've planned for the Opportunity Index and also continue to help schools who maybe did have a program where things have shifted as the result of the new programming around Opportunity Index, to help them find a way and a path forward so that it doesn't feel like a complete loss, and maybe there are other resources that are available. So again, I will defer to the superintendent and to Eleanor because they are really the experts in some of those detailed conversations. But Justin, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say there's a kind of a whole slate of investments that the FY19 budget has that try to get after that exact sort of resiliency and equity and prosperity. I would say the studies that we have attached to them, phase 2 of a disparity study looking at city procurement laws to make sure, or city procurement to make sure we're reflecting a diverse and, you know, a diverse pool of people that we can draw from to fund city services. An economic inclusion and equity agenda update, that's an investment in expanding the city's economic inclusion and equity agenda program. Reviewing and supporting the Main Streets program. The Main Streets program is, I think, a 35-year-old program that's been very successful in a lot of districts throughout the city. This would be reviewing it to make sure that we're optimizing it to hit the districts that are needed and that are sort of would benefit from that type of investment. And then finally, I would say the digital equity grant. I mentioned it before, but 15% of Bostonians don't have reliable access to internet at home. This would be $100,000 to triple the size of a program that we have currently to help attack that and help try to shrink that number. And I would say, I think Emma's point is exactly correct. Education is a great equalizer. So in the $48 million that we do have going to BPS in new money next year, about $10 million of that goes to those highest need students and those highest need schools that serve some of the most underserved populations that we have.
In terms of the disparity study, where are we in that process?
So phase 1 started, I think, about a month or so ago. Phase 2 will sort of roll it after the first phase is complete. We can certainly get you some, John Barros and his team can certainly get some more details on that.
Yeah, I would be very interested in
Sure.
that. On page 15, I think it was, you talked about the cadets and as a way to recruit diverse officers. So are there 20 cadets?
Yep, there'll be 20 new cadets in FY19 starting in the spring. There's currently a class ongoing, and that'll bring the totals in the last 3 years of the program to 90 officers.
And is there something similar in terms of fire? What are the efforts to increase diversity in terms of the fire department?
So I'd certainly defer to the commissioner on that one, but there isn't an exact one-to-one match the same way there is for the cadet program.
Could you talk a little bit more about the Main Streets? So it's a study just to kind of look to see where we are?
Exactly. So I definitely defer to John on the exact details of that, but the program's been around a long time. It's been very successful. I think there's an interest in taking a look at it to see if we can target it to more diverse areas and sort of any areas that may not be getting as much attention as they necessarily deserve. And I think that the idea would be I think it's a $35,000 investment to hire a consultant to take a look at the program to make sure that we're targeting it in the right ways.
So this, unlike the disparity study, this is new in FY19. I think there's it's still coming into existence, right? And so I think John Barris is certainly driving that and will be defining what that looks like. And I'm sure we'll be interested in hearing from the council in terms of the direction that will go.
That would be great. I'm particularly interested in making sure, well, and looking at what exactly we're measuring in terms of success. So I just held a city council hearing, and one thing that came up on this issue was that Main Streets often looks at new businesses, but not necessarily vacancy rates. And so just making sure that we're measuring the right things. I will wrap up. I know we've got some other folks. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let me acknowledge that we've been joined by Councilor Ayanna Presley and Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, team. I know we are moments away from our first revolving fund hearing, so I shall be as brief as humanly possible. Justin, we're talking about fully funding the pension by 2025. This is my 8th budget, and I remember hearing about that in the first budget, but we're 8 years closer to it. So talk a little bit about what that will mean for obviously our stellar bond rating, but just our ability to leverage that when that is fully funded in a mere 6-7 years.
Absolutely. And that is a long way away, and that is a big commitment over the next 6 or 7 years, and something that we look forward to. Once we have that fully funded, it kind of frees up funding that we can look at some of our other long-term liabilities like OPEB. It's certainly something that, while not as maybe prescient or well-known as the sort of pension funding, OPEB is becoming more and more of a talking point among rating agencies and
just so folks watching, it's other post-employment benefits.
Exactly. So health insurance for retirees. Yep. And that's something that we look forward to seeing what our capabilities are to once we do get fully funded. We still have to make it an investment on a yearly basis in the pension, but there will be an opportunity to potentially redirect some of that to funding some of our other long-term liabilities.
It's exciting. It's an exciting thing, and kudos to you guys. That's
I come from the state, and they're on 2035 or 2040, so we're 10 years ahead of them.
Yeah.
I would definitely add, I think we are very well situated amongst other major cities and other cities in the Commonwealth in terms of how we've chosen to address our pension schedule. And it also allows us to maintain that AAA bond rating, as we talked about, which directly impacts our ability to borrow and our ability to do new capital spending and do things like new libraries and keeping our streets paved and all of the things that we care very much about affording in our capital budget are directly related to our ability to address these long-term liabilities.
And I think the previous regime and the current regime deserve credit for getting us to this point. This will be a really exciting thing once we're able to hit that mark, and it's not too far off in the distance. Very briefly, because we'll get into specifics with the hearings, but so the ride share, the way the state legislation is written, it's 10 cents per origin of, so the trips that originate in Boston. 10 cents. What about trips that originate in Dedham or Milton and end in Boston, which I would venture guess many will be? We don't get any revenue for those.
I don't believe so, yeah, no.
Was that, I don't want to go off topic, but it seems to me that we're leaving a lot of money on the table in that case.
Yeah, I guess maybe the other communities like Dedham or Milton would probably want to access some of that funding too. It's only for 5 years, and eventually that 10 cents actually does sunset.
Yeah.
And it's funding that we have to direct towards transportation-related spending.
Yeah.
So it's certainly it's a benefit. It's certainly money that we didn't have before, but it's
Is there opportunity for local option discretion to sort of revisit that? I think Councilor McCarthy had suggested through a home rule or.
I definitely would want to double check the law, but my guess is that I think the state law might be all-encompassing.
Okay. And then, so the fact that we are now over 70% of our budget comes from property taxes, I think it's pretty accurate to say, while nobody enjoys paying taxes, relatively speaking, we have a pretty reasonable property tax rate. Property values obviously have gone up so much, but that's been able to allow us to increase, obviously, revenue that way. You have $55 million allocated in new growth. The construction boom has obviously helped Boston thrive as we have. You said in the breakfast that's the largest amount we've ever allocated in a budget at this point. How much did we allocate last year?
53.
53, and it ended up being 77.
Yes.
So I mentioned this at the breakfast. There's a fairly good chance that $55 million may be the ceiling, maybe the floor, not the ceiling on what actually comes in with new growth.
I think it's highly dependent, obviously, on what happens with new growth and development in the city of Boston over the next fiscal year. And I also think that it is a place where it's important for us to ensure that we are budgeting on a number that is sustainable and can withstand future fluctuations in development in the city of Boston.
100% understood, and obviously your jobs are to be as prudent as possible with that, but it would suggest that given the way the market has sustained, there's probably a good chance that we may see a little bit more new growth. But obviously you want to balance that in the years where we're not as strong as we are right now. Thank you, lady, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you. Councilor Presley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you. We sing a lot of each other, and I'll try to be, just getting my voice back, I'll try to be succinct here and save the lion's share of my questions for future hearings. But just a couple of top-line questions here. Could you tell me if we've seen a growth, or what was the revenue from our meals and hotel taxes, and has that been an increase from last year? And I have the same question for our tourism dollars.
So I believe that in the FY19 budget, our rooms tax will increase by $4 million, and our meals tax will increase by $3 million. I don't have the totals
The
right in front of
revenue.
me. The revenue. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
By four, say it one more time.
That the rooms tax, Justin's going to check me here, but the rooms tax will increase by $4 million over FY18, and the meals tax by $3 million.
Okay. And then I'd just be curious about our tourism revenue as well,
We'll get that for you.
from those taxes.
Sure.
And then Councilor Wu and I partnered, and this council supported, as did the mayor's office, an MBE ordinance to strengthen the opportunity for procurement and contracting, supplier diversity, since we're all committed to addressing income inequality in the city. And so I was just wondering if you could provide any numbers in this, for FY19, in terms of what our spend has been with minority women in business enterprise.
I don't
Don't have that
in front
off the top of
us.
my head, but we can certainly find that out for you.
Absolutely.
Okay. That would be helpful, just so that
Absolutely.
so we know where we're starting in order to
Yeah,
speak to
absolutely.
whether or not the ordinance is, in its enforcement, having any impact.
Yep.
My next question is, could you talk a little bit about the status of the mayor's proposal to use the Boston Convention and Exhibition Center money targeted towards early education and care?
Sure. As you alluded to, Councilor, the mayor filed a bill at the State House that would take $16.5 million from the Convention Center Fund to fund universal pre-K here in the city of Boston. The reason that the mayor proposed that this funding be dedicated to the city of Boston for UPK is because these funds are actually generated here in Boston through things like the surcharge on car rentals, and I believe also surcharge on things like the duck boats. That funding would allow us to provide quality UPK throughout the city of Boston. And it's something that the mayor continues to advocate for at the State House. I'll let Justin give an update on exactly where that bill is, but it's certainly something that we continue to advocate for and think would have a great impact here in the city. It would allow us to jumpstart that program. As you know, the language has allowed for if the convention center expansion does move forward, for that money to be returned to the convention center, and then at that point the city of Boston would need to find how to fund those seats on an ongoing basis. But I think the first goal is to get that program up and running, and then we will ensure that we can support it with longevity once it's established with those funds.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it was reported out favorably out of the Education Committee about a month ago. It's in the Joint Bonding Committee right now. It's one of the bills that was reported out favorably out of the mayor's education finance package. So it's something we definitely we're pushing for the remainder of the legislative session, which runs till the end of July. It's certainly right up there with advocating for full funding of the charter school formula, as well as more funding for Chapter 70 and Circuit Breaker.
Great. And then could you offer any projections around cannabis revenue?
Yeah, so we've baked in about, pardon my pun, we've baked in about $2 million for revenue next year, with sales expected to begin on July 1st. I think we discussed it a little bit before, but that we were consistent with what the state was projecting for their tax revenue. So the state is budgeting on between $40 and $50 million. That would translate, with the way the law is written, to about $2 million for the city.
Okay. All right, and so then my final question for this round, to Counselor Janey's point around equity, I just wanted to understand, I think you said for the 10 million allocated for the students with the highest need, I just am wondering specifically how Madison Park High School factors into this, because the school has been struggling for quite some time, and a lot of that, you know, in my humble opinion, is an underinvestment for a voc ed school. So I just wanted to know specifically, and I can unpack it further in BPS, but could you speak about how those dollars are being allocated?
Sure. So the majority of the 10 million is going to be funded through the Opportunity Index, which was a year-long process with the Budget Equity Working Group through BPS to develop a formula to sort of best target those dollars to the highest need students. It takes a look at race, it takes a look at income levels, takes a look at other factors that might be contributing to a student's success. So we'd have to find out exactly where Madison Park falls on that list. But if I had to venture to take a guess, I'm assuming that they would benefit from some of those dollars.
Okay, and then just again on my earlier question around hotels and meals and tourism dollars, based on the projections you offered, is that an increase?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we're projecting, that's
Sorry, that was the incremental number I gave you, Counselor. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's my question.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get what's the contrast?
Yep.
I apologize, I don't have it in front of me, but it's, we are projecting an increase in the excise taxes that come from the growing economy here with the hotels and motels and the meals tax.
Okay, so we can look more into that more granularly in the future. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Second round, Councilor Sabi George.
Thank you again, Chair. I'll just go through, I've got a few short questions, I think, and then just a few that I'll preview for the future hearings ahead. Do we ever, thinking about our spending trends, and then the work that we do as a city, do we ever do an operational audit to really look at how we're spending our money and doing our work within each department?
So the city has certainly undertaken operational audits, which I think are not necessarily directed specifically at spending in some cases, but might go in and look at a department and see, you know, overall operationally, how exactly is that department performing. And those can be helpful tools at times when we want to understand a little bit more about what a department is doing. I don't know, I mean, certainly I think that overall the responsibility of OBM and the budget office is really to sort of act as that budget monitoring group and to help understand what departments are spending funds on, you know, over the course of the year, because of course not only are they responsible for helping pull together an annual budget, but they are responsible for the management of that budget throughout the fiscal year. So in FY18 right now, they're actively engaged in ensuring that departments are hitting their spending targets and are not obviously overspending and things like that.
I see the correlation between the work that needs to happen, how we, you know, and labor is one of our greatest expenses.
Sure.
But then its implications to overtime spending, but it also, when we talk about the unfilled positions and how we choose to either fill them, to purge them, to delete them from our system, or to hire contract employees in the interim for whatever purpose. So I think that they do go hand in hand, that sort of the
Absolutely.
financial commitment we make as a city to the department and to the work that we do is directly reflected in sort of the operations of that department.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would say we do that on a daily basis. We are always working with departments to understand their needs. If they'd like to trade in a position that maybe they thought that they needed, but maybe they'd like to do something different with, we take a look at both the financial and workflow implications of something like that.
Great. And then on slide 9, you talked about monitoring collections and billing and better optimizing, you know, non-tax revenues. Do we have any data on our ability to fulfill our collections? Like what's our, and I don't know what the appropriate term would be, but how much are we capturing
Our
of what's
collections
owed to
rate,
us?
basically.
Is that the collections rate? What's our collections rate?
I think it depends very much on what the type of revenue is. So our property tax collection rate is basically 100%.
Yep.
And it certainly depends from there on what type of revenue you're talking about and what the various sort of carrots and sticks are that the city has to help it collect that revenue.
Well, the carrots and sticks with our constituencies that would contribute to that revenue, but then also within the departments, what is the benefit for them receiving that collection, whether it's worth sort of the work that needs to go in. For example, in BPS, and I'll talk about this in BPS, we sometimes have whether it's the school nurse or a social worker or a behavioral health specialist or through a SPED IEP evaluation, a lot of the services we provide can be billable to health insurance. But that reimbursement of those billable hours goes back into the general fund. If schools saw that money, I think we'd do a much better job at not just getting reimbursed, but making sure that we're properly documenting what we're being reimbursed for, so we, maximize all of those reimbursables along the way. And I wonder if the same could apply within different departments in the city that collect.
Sure.
I think that's a great point. It's certainly something that I think has been a priority of OBM for the past couple of years, has been really getting involved in how cities are collecting their revenue, because it becomes so essential when we look at that pie of city revenue. And so I think new ideas and new opportunities around that are always welcome, and something that I think we'd very much like to take a look at.
And something we haven't talked about, and I don't know where the appropriate opportunity to do that, is about the free cash pool. And where does that stand? What do we use that for? Sort of, how much money is in that pot right now?
Sure. There is at the end of FY17, we had free cash certification of over $300 million. That really is essentially our rainy day fund, and helps the city to be prepared should, we have that day, that rainy day when we need to have reserves available to us. It's something that we obviously monitor very closely, and it's something that is part of one pillar of our strong financial management that our investors, rating agencies, and others really look to ensure that the city is adequately planning for days when it becomes harder and harder for us to balance our budget and to manage in a given fiscal year.
And I think it was Councilor Janey that asked the question about, better understanding the protocol, the procedures to access that rainy day fund. So I think that would be helpful to know, how much is there, its growth over the years, because I imagine it's been growing.
Sure.
But then what are the conditions that would allow us to access that?
Sure.
And how are we preparing for the future? Because, eventually as state aid goes down, as the trends in collection, property tax is lower this year than it's been, what are we preparing for, and what would allow us to access that, should we need to? And then, something I'll ask, but I think I'll mention it here, it is, I don't need an answer today, but something I'll ask. When Build BPS, with the onset of Build BPS, have we, in the change of facilities from the school department to here centrally, have we realized any efficiencies? What have been the challenges with that move? That's something that I'm really curious about, especially as we talk about Build BPS. And then also with Build BPS, and I'll ask this again of the superintendent, but I think it's relative to our capital improvements, is we talk a lot about our school facilities, our school buildings when we talk about Build BPS, but we haven't really incorporated the conversation around some of our athletic fields and how we program those athletic fields potentially using some of that investment. And then the digital grant that came up during Councilor Janey's questions, I wonder if we can work with some of our family shelters in the city so that they can have some access to the internet, and to sort of the digital divide is, I think, even more impactful for those families. And then when we talk about state aid, declining state aid, but we have an increasing amount of guests presenting themselves at our city shelters. So over 50% of individuals who present to our city shelters are not from the city of Boston. They're coming from other communities, and I think that there could be a way that we bill those sending communities for the services that we're providing their residents, because I think we want to continue to do that work, but it's at a tremendous expense as other cities get out of the work of sheltering and providing services to their homeless. And then my last question, and this will, I think, come up in greater detail with either the Health Commission or the Police Department, but last year, Councilor Presley and I worked tirelessly with a number of different folks to get 4 best clinicians as part of last year's budget. It's a victory that we celebrated, but my understanding is the funding actually only supported 2.5 clinicians. So I want to make that, I want to right-size that through this budget process, because I think that everyone is in agreement that it's something worthwhile, worth our energy and our investment. And that's it for me.
Great.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Flaherty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Justin and Emmy, I just want to dial back a little bit more on that, the parking meter fund. Do you know how many meters have been removed in the last 5 years?
We don't. Certainly something that I think the Transportation Department could answer, and we can have them.
Yeah, that'd be great if you can give me the data, because I almost see a very similar trend with our property taxes, where we have, we have property tax being taken off the tax rolls. We have meters that generate revenue for the city. You guys are boasting sort of the parking meter fund, yet on a regular basis, we're seeing meters being removed just outside here, just out at City Hall Plaza. Whole stretch of meters, probably 20, 25 meters are now gone. That's revenue that we can't recapture unless we're replacing those. So I guess the second part is what's the city's plan to put on, to restore meters that have been removed, or to add additional meters, because it's a revenue for us, revenue source for us. So, and maybe we can see something included in the 2030 plan as well. Again, very, very viable and vital revenue source for us, particularly if we're able to eliminate the handicap parking fraud and abuse that exists. But if we have this revenue generator and we continue to remove them, it's almost very similar to what we're seeing with our property tax. So it's, garages are becoming cost prohibitive for working families. I think the average garage is between $25 and $30 for the first hour, particularly in and around the downtown area. That's not, that's not really sustainable for folks. And it's also forcing an untenable situation whereby you'd actually increase the abuse of handicap parking fraud. Because if no one's going to be paying garage fees at $25, $30 an hour, they'll just go get their doctor to write them a note, and then they'll just park in a regular spot and not have to pay the meter. And we continue to take meters off the street, which then intensifies that competition for more people to now go get the note from their doctor so you sort of see this cyclical issue that's kind of happening and unfolding right before our eyes. So that has to be addressed. So if you guys can get back to me with the number of meters that have been removed in the last 5 years, and what's the city's plan to add meters for revenue purposes. And then also want to dial down on the street sweeping in-house. So you guys talked about the street sweeping in-house. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Does that mean we're adding hokies?
No, sorry. So last year we did District 6, and we're proposing to bring in street sweeping. Right now we have contractors for every district other than 6. We would bring street sweeping in-house for District 8 too, at a cost savings for the city. So we would buy a new street
So meaning the city has, so we're furnishing the equipment, and we have our own employees going out there street sweeping, okay. And then just a footnote on that, with respect to the increased fees and fines, there is a provision to increase around the street cleaning. I think we have an obligation at the end of the day to clean the street. So if we're going to increase the fines around parking on street cleaning and/or towing the vehicle, and we're not going to get to the curb, I don't think we should issue that ticket, and/or we should be able to exonerate individuals that have that happen. So we need to almost have it tied to it. So if the ask is to increase fees for that, or if in the instances of a vehicle being towed, if we can't demonstrate that we've honored our obligation, which is to actually clean the street and get a hokey or get a broom to the curb, then that should be sort of a mitigating circumstance if someone decides to appeal.
And
that
Councilor,
ticket.
I think to your point there, that's really the goal around the increasing that ticket around the overnight parking in particular. It's just for the places where it's overnight street sweeping. The goal is that the current program to tow is not effectual, so it's hard to get to the curb. And I think the idea is that if we are able to change behavior through increasing the ticket, and that's the idea in several of these tickets, but maybe most particularly around the street sweeping one, that we would be able to get those cars off the road, which would allow Transportation Department to get to the curb.
And Emmy, what you guys will learn, which is what I know, because as the longest serving council, there's been a lot of contentious battles on this floor around this issue. Clearly, the goal and the objective is to clean the streets. It's not to throw the resident, the taxpayer, into the headlock and nickel and dime them. But what happens is it's not learned behavior. No one literally pulls up in front of the house and says, oh, this is great. Street cleaning's tomorrow. I'm going to leave my car right here because I don't want a clean street. It's by accident. It's you worked a late shift. It's you couldn't find a spot in front of your house and you parked in another street and you didn't know the street cleaning was Tuesday because your day is Wednesday. You had a sick relative, you had a sick kid, you're picking up, you're dropping off. So everyone's day-to-day activity means that that's not learned behavior. It's not if you just tow somebody, they'll never do that again. That doesn't happen. We see repeat people because it's working families that are coming and going, that are trying to take care of their kids, take care of their elderly relatives and parents. So we'll have this discussion again. It does nothing. It has zero impact on whether or not someone parks on street cleaning. It's all by accident. You see the reaction when you see someone's car get towed. They're pulling up and they're like, oh my God, I forgot it was Wednesday. I forgot it was Tuesday. This isn't normally the street that I park on. I usually park around the corner. So you can fine them $1,000 and you can tow and impound their car. And it'll happen again because they don't do it on purpose. So I know it's a revenue generator, but at the end of the day, our obligation is to clean the streets. It's not to throw people in the headlock and to have them go bankrupt over having to pay the ticket and the fee and the fine and the tow and then the taxi ride to the tow lot to get the car out of the lot. So, but looking forward to the hearings because it'll be another go around. But I appreciate it. Thank you, Emmy. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you. Councilor Flynn?
Thank you, Counselor. And I have a couple questions. I just wanted to follow up from my earlier questions. As it relates to public libraries, I know, first of all, I want to thank the mayor for tremendous work on opening a library in Chinatown. It was an incredible day to see the residents of Chinatown finally have a library, although it's temporary, but I just want to say thank you to the mayor for strong leadership on this issue. But also, I know there's some funding that will be used for the South Boston Library, some renovations of the outside square. That will go a long way. It'll be very helpful. But I do know that South Boston and the South End have two of the oldest public libraries in the city. And I'm wondering, can we get them on a schedule to do a study, a long-term study of what the future is of both locations and possibly considering building new libraries in those neighborhoods?
I'll speak to the South End one first. I think in the plan, we have a study in there to take a look at the future of that program and what type of needs that they might have. So I think we can get you the exact number on that one, but there should be something in there for the South End Library.
Yeah, I know the neighborhood would love to see a brand-new library there, and I would support that as well. What about the South Boston Library?
So I think that I don't know if there's any funding in the capital plan right now to build a new South Boston Library. It sounds like there might be some funding in there for the repairs, but I could get you the details on that one.
Yeah, it's some repairs to improve the use and access to the backyard.
Oh, okay, yeah.
That will go a long way helping the community. Could I get a little bit more information down the road on both South End, Chinatown, and South Boston? Thank you. As it relates to the digital divide, the internet access, are you able to focus any of that funding or the program into public housing?
So last year, or this year, FY18 was the first year of the program, so I think that they were, and it was a smaller pool of money, it was only about $33,000. So I think the idea being that they released an RFP to see sort of what the demand was for helping to close that type of digital divide. I think there's certainly opportunities to expand the pool of sort of applicants to that type of grant program, but we can work with the Do It team who spearheads that work for us to see what type of adjustments they can make to the RFP.
Yeah, if you're able to work closely with BHA, I think it would be very helpful to the residents in public housing to have internet access. It would help the young people doing their homework and with educational progress. So if you could keep me posted on that, that'd be helpful.
Absolutely.
I know one of the biggest accomplishments the mayor has done as mayor is the great work he's done, the administration has done in terms of providing housing to homeless veterans. Is there anything in the budget about this program or what you're doing in the future on making sure that we continue the great progress of the administration on homeless veterans?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we fully fund PHC's ability to implement the homeless action plan of ending chronically homeless individuals. I think that's part of a larger strategy we have around housing, both from the creation of long-term affordable housing stock. I'd say the biggest keynote is the mayor recently announced the Boston Way Home Fund, which is a $10 million initiative to create 2,000 or 200 units of subsidized housing for chronically homeless people. We've already raised, the mayor's already raised $3 million for that program, and it's certainly the work that we continue to push for. It's sort of raised through private donations at this point, but it's definitely a signature piece of the homeless action plan.
Thank you. And as it relates to, I know Council Flaherty was talking about it and is doing great work on it. The Hokies that are now throughout the city, I know we have one in Andrew Square and Broadway. It's only for a certain period of time throughout the year. Could we have a pilot plan to, I'd love to see them 12 months a year. I think it would go a long way to make sure that our streets are clean. I see these Hokies and they're excellent, they're professional, they're hardworking, they're determined, they're city workers and they're doing a great job. But I'd love to see them 12 months a year. Could we consider that in the budget in the future?
Yeah, so the budget fully funds the investment we made last year in the Hokie program. We can certainly take a look with Public Works to understand what that type of request would cost.
Okay, and would you keep me posted on the progress on that?
Yeah.
And the final question I had is, I think Council Flaherty was talking about it as well. I know some of the meters that we're taking away, it's lost revenue. It happened in Chinatown, and some of the businesses are impacted because now there's no parking on some of these main streets along Chinatown that benefited the businesses. I know there were bike lanes added. But is there a way that we can help small businesses, help our restaurants by not eliminating these meters? Because they do play an important role in making sure that people can come to their restaurant, park safe, park close to the impacted area.
I think, Councilor, it sounds like it's certainly something that we should ask the Transportation Department to come ready to discuss when they come to their budget hearing, because I have to imagine that the meters were removed for a particular reason, and I think they could speak better to exactly why that would be, and I'm sure it's different in each instance, and so we'll ask them to come back with that information.
Yeah, the location in Chinatown was, the meters were taken out because of bike lanes were added, but also it limits the number of parking spots that could benefit potential customers going to these restaurants.
Sure.
I can ask the school department when they come in, but what's the status of the teachers as it relates to the ROTC program? Are we eliminating any JROTC teachers as part of this process?
We'll have to check with BPS.
Would there be a reason that you would cut funding for ROTC teachers?
It wouldn't have been an FY19 budget proposal, so we'll have to check with BPS about whether there's a particular school or something like that.
Yeah, right. I know that these instructors provide great education to our young people that want to participate in the ROTC program. The programs are working. I would just hate to see that the school department cut any funding for the ROTC program.
We can look into that.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Councilor Janey.
Hi, how are you? Could you tell me what the administration does in terms of looking at equity overall and how the budget will either help or hurt in terms of closing disparities? Is there a process that you go through? Is there an equity impact statement that you do for each section of the budget? Is that something that we could get? It's something I'm very interested in, something I certainly pushed for in my advocacy and education, and making sure that now the school department will offer a impact statement, an opportunity impact statement in terms of how this will hurt or help the opportunity and achievement gap. I wonder if there's a similar process with the city budget.
I think it's sort of different for the operating and the capital budgets. They're slightly different processes. I think the process around the operating budget really is developed through input with departments and prioritization of need and requests through departments, and so that's something that they help us understand. And then on the capital side, we look at it through the lens of neighborhoods oftentimes. We obviously look at a number of different things, but one of the key things that we look at is ensuring that there are investments in every neighborhood, and that it's a varied list of types of investments. And that things like new sidewalks, new streets, and things like that are reaching all of the different areas of the city, so that we ensure that the city funds are being spent in a way that is reaching all of our neighborhoods.
Right. And, I just hope in a way that is really equitable. So I really applaud the city for looking at sidewalks, to your point, and taking a new approach. So in the past, just kind of doing the 311 calls, and the squeaky wheel would always get the oil, but really not taking into account, that there are a number of people who may not call, but still have equal need, if not greater need. And so I'm really interested in whatever we can do to really make sure that everything that we approach, that we're doing it through this equity lens, and would encourage, some sort of equity impact statement. In terms of transportation, traffic, this is an issue that you hear no matter who you talk to, residents, business owners, it comes up time and time again. I'm, in terms of just building on what Councilor Flaherty was asking in some of his points, very much in favor of raising revenue, particularly if it's going to help improve transportation for those, particularly who are not using cars, who rely on buses, because that is kind of an economic justice issue for them in terms of getting to school and work and things of that sort. But I'm worried that, not all of our neighborhoods have the same amount of parking. To Councilor Flint's point, certainly my district, does not have a lot of parking. I hear complaints from business owners all the time, from residents where, if they live near the train station, people are coming in, parking in front of their house. If they do resident stickers, there's then the overflow domino effect. Is there a study that has been done that looks at the amount of parking by neighborhood so that we can have a sense of how these parking fines are going to impact local businesses and residents? And, and I ask because if I live or work in the area, downtown, Copley, Newbury, there are meters, there are lots, there are garages, but if you're in an area like Dudley or another neighborhood district, you don't have those things. You have very limited parking, very limited lots. There are a couple of municipal lots, but employees tend to use those. And so if we're going to then, have these fines in place, I worry that some neighborhoods are going to be impacted more so than others.
Sure. I think that that's something that the Transportation Department has been looking at, and I think they would be able to provide a great deal of information about that when they come in to talk to you about their budget. I will say that I think part of the idea around the parking fines, which again, Chris Osgood and his team can speak much more about because they've done the work behind this, but part of the idea is that it would help in our business districts and not just our downtown business districts, because some of the fines that are being targeted would help people who are either overstaying a meter or who have double parked and make it hard for people to find other parking. And so I think the idea is partially on that behavioral front, where we are trying to target things that our residents complain the most about and that people see as impediments either to living or to working in our city, which include things that make it hard to drive a car, not just things that make it hard to bike or to walk around, but certainly some of the fines are intended to help people who are in cars with congestion and parking and things like that. And so the goal is that not only would it raise revenue to advance projects that would help drivers, walkers, bikers, but that the fines themselves will actually change the behavior that will allow for better parking by increasing people who overstay their meter, so you allow people to circulate better, and other things like that. But again, I would defer to the streets team to talk more about that.
I can appreciate that, and I certainly don't condone double parking. But to my earlier point, if you kind of live in an area where there is not ample parking, then the behavior becomes you double park because you're just going to run in, you're going to just, get something really quickly, and then you'll be hit with a fine. So if you live in an area that doesn't have parking, doesn't have a meter, where people are overstaying because there aren't meters, and then you double park, you're hit kind of with a double whammy. And so, I guess, my encouragement here is around making sure that we can use the carrot as much as possible and not just the stick, because my worry is that neighborhoods that are already struggling around parking, particularly, this affects business owners and residents, are going to really be hit hard. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm good.
I just have a couple of quick requests before we let you guys go. Any layoffs departmental-wide other than just elimination of positions?
Of the vacant positions, no.
Okay. I also would like to get the third quarter report for FY18 when you have a chance. And if you could supply us with a historical trend of staffing levels, maybe the last 10 years on a graph would be helpful. And then finally, free cash came up. We didn't dip into free cash for revenue, or did we?
No, we did. We are budgeting on 40 million in the recurring free cash that we have the last 2 or 3 years.
Is for OPEBs?
For OPEB, yeah.
Right, gotcha. Okay. I guess that's it. Councilor Janey.
Last question, and maybe Chief of Streets can answer, but I was wondering, what are the plans to publicize the new parking fees and fines?
We haven't passed them yet, so.
Well, if we're talking about it, we've got to be proactive with a plan to kind of get that information out to folks.
Sure, yeah. We can certainly touch base with him, but we're happy to provide a list of the things that have been proposed to make sure that people can see what those look like and are able to react to the individual items that are on the list. They are the ones that we've most frequently encountered as being issues around parking in our city.
Thank you. I have one person signed up. Sam Tyler from the Boston Municipal Research Bureau.
So, Mr. Chairman, we're in the same situation as we have been in past years.
Yes.
All right. For the record, my name is Sam Tyler. I'm the president of the Boston Municipal Research Bureau. And in light of the hour and the fact that you're almost 40 minutes into a hearing that hasn't started yet, I'll try to be succinct. We will follow up and incorporate some of these comments into a report we'll be issuing, since we won't be able to say everything we'd like to say. And some of it's just going to be re-emphasis of points already made, but only the important points. So property tax, it's already been talked about in terms of, it's a $2.3 billion revenue source, an increase of $118 million. 70% of the total revenue budget for the city is coming from the property tax, 86% of the total revenue increase. So it just further reinforces the importance. That's broken down between the levy growth of $55.5 million and the new growth estimate of $55 million. But that's a number that I think it's already been raised. You need to watch, because last year at this time, new growth was $53 million, and when the tax rate was set in December, it was $77 million. And I think this is a number that needs to be watched. I mean, we've been fortunate, the city's been fortunate to have this new growth, but there will be a downturn. And I think the city needs to be careful about its reliance on new growth to support recurring operational revenue. Frankly, going forward after this year, I think they should be thinking more in terms of some part of the new growth being used for one-time, non-recurring expenses. So when the downturn comes, you're not hit that hard. State aid, again, it's $445 million, so it's not insignificant. It's the second largest revenue source of the city, but it's a $4.4 million increase. This is based on the governor's budget, which is a 1% increase. So property tax state aid, that's 83% of the city's total operational revenue. State aid represents 13.5% of the revenue budget, but only basically a little over 3% of the revenue increase. So that compares to the property tax, as we said earlier, which is a 70% of the revenue and 86% of the increase. Chapter 70, it's rather, you've already heard about the net Chapter 70, so I'm just straight Chapter 70. It's the largest education, it's the largest state aid account at $219 million, but it's estimated to increase by, $1.3 million, 0.6%. I mean, that's totally inadequate. And as we have written in the past, the state is not keeping pace with what cities and towns around the Commonwealth really need in education. Now, the House budget does provide an additional $646,000, but it still doesn't change the percentage increase to beyond 0.6%. And then the charter school reimbursement is the other larger revenue source from the state, but this year it's $21.3 million, which represents a decrease of $1.8 million from this year. Even with the House budget, which adds more funds, it still would be a decrease. The excise revenues has been discussed. That's really, if you take the 10 different excise revenues, which would include the marijuana excise, I mean, that's really the third largest revenue category, which is good. It's a growth revenue area, but it's a small part of the overall budget. I guess the building permits, I'll just note that because I think for the first time in some time, building permits estimated at $45 million represents a decrease of $1.1 million. So that is concerning if that is the beginning of a trend. Other revenues that were talked about available, parking meter fee funds. I know I was hearing different numbers, but in the budget, I think they're talking about $22.5 million to be used, and some of that will be used for capital purposes. But the table in the budget shows an overall funding out of about $53 million. So that just raises the question that we haven't had a chance to ask yet. Cemetery funds, $950,000. So this is continuing what the city has been doing, and some of that is part of the creative funding for the larger capital needs that have been beginning to be implemented as a result of the planning efforts that have been underway over the last couple of years. All those are recurring revenues. The only non-recurring revenue is from the budgetary fund balance or free cash account of $40 million for the OPEB trust, which is a practice the city has undertaken for several years. And I think the bottom line in terms of revenues is that as the city has in the past, these are conservative revenue estimates, as they need to be, not knowing and what may come, and knowing that from past experience there are departments like police and fire that some will often spend beyond their appropriations or The execution of courts, another account that sometimes goes beyond the budget. So you need to have that flexibility, and so it has served the city well to have conservative revenue estimates, and we support that effort on the part of the administration. Fairly quickly, let me just talk about expenses. There's, I guess the point that didn't come out is that, it's of a $3.2 billion budget, expenses related to city employees represent about $2.2 billion, and 68% of the recommended budget and 63% of the increased cost. So that's where a good part of the budget lies, and one reason that there has been in the past and continues to be needed control over increased spending, although this budget does provide for over 200 positions to be added to the budget, 2/3 of which are in the big three departments of school, police, and fire. So that's, I guess, an area that we've always argued needs to be watched in terms of spending as a way to control spending and manage spending. The departmental budgets, if you break this out, the departmental budgets represent about 68% of the overall budget and 40% of the total increase. Mandatory accounts, which are health insurance, debt service, state assessments, and pensions, represent only 29% of the budget, but also close to 40% of the increased spending. And that faster growth in these mandatory expenses, and we've talked about why pensions are, is part of the explanation for the tightening of budgets, or departmental budgets, particularly below the big three or big four. So if you take a look at what you requested in terms of your 10-year personnel changes, you'll see that many of the smaller departments have fewer employees as the big three have grown, but that's partly due to the fact that the state has not been consistent or has not really been supportive in terms of education aid, the increase in charter school tuition assessment, and as a result, the city has had to cut back. And there's been many times we've had hearings about some of the collective bargaining on contracts, and particularly where there's binding arbitration contracts, and the question is, can you afford the contract? And the answer is yes, but. And the but is what you would see over the 10 years in terms of cutting back on personnel levels in some of the smaller departments. I digress, but the other point we want to make is that, like many public budgets, it's only a few accounts that can make up a big part of the total budget, so that of the over 50 budget units or accounts, there are 8 accounts that represent 85% of the total budget. So it's really your police, well, school, police, fire, public works, in terms of departmental, and then the mandatory pension, debt service, state assessments, and health insurance. Those 8 accounts represent 85% of the total budget. The other, I guess the other thing, just to cut through a lot of this, in terms of debt service, this is going to be interesting as it started to be last year, but to take a look at all the different factors that represent or that make up the funding for the capital budget. It's not just through the increase in debt service, and frankly, debt service in this budget for fiscal 19 represents 5.8% of the total budget. The city's standard for debt service is 7%. So we're way below, where the city says its standard is, and that's fairly conservative in itself. I mean, you could get to 7% right away, and the rating agencies wouldn't even look at it. You can go beyond 7%, but so the city has had to try to be creative in terms of other revenue sources like parking meter fees and things like that to support that. let me just finish. There was a comment about could the business community do more in terms of providing funds. I can't resist in terms of reminding the city council that it's in the city council that every year they agree to the recommendation to shift as much of the tax burden onto business as possible. So 175% of what they would pay if there was just a single tax rate. The business community is paying 62% of the Community Preservation Act. Businesses paying more in terms of inclusionary development, in terms of linkage. So I guess I represented business. I would say be careful about how much more you want to add on to business if you want to continue the development that we're enjoying right now. So those are my abbreviated comments. There'll be more in a report that we will issue.
Thank you very much, Sam, and thank you to the Municipal Research Bureau for all their input over the years. That concludes this hearing. I'd just like to end on a note to follow up on Councilor O'Malley. You know, the city of Boston is more the exception than the rule as far as city finances go. And I'm very proud of the fact that we're paying our bills so that the future generations don't have to. We've incurred a lot of that for many years. And other than educating our children, I think not leaving them saddled with massive debt is the next best thing we can do for the next generation coming up. And I applaud the efforts of you, your team, especially the mayor and his leadership, and you know, and this council as well has played that role over the past 10 years. And Sam has something to add.
Yeah, now that you raised that issue, I wanted to also make a point that
you're not going to,
in terms of
rain on my parade there, are you?
No. It's why it's prudent for the city to be having an aggressive pension funding schedule so that the pension can be, or the liability, which is about $1.5 billion, less than the OPEB liability. Right. Can be paid, or they reach full funding, because in 2025, because in 2026, it's something like 80% of the pension costs are going to go away. Right. I mean, you'll need to still put more money to maintain the full funding, but this gives the city the opportunity to really seriously address the OPEB liability, which is something like $2.1 billion now.
I think we might have close to $500 million, though, from these years of the trust fund?
Yes.
Or about that?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's about $400
Yeah, well,
million.
but this is where the source of money can come to really finally address that, and then really take the long-term liability away from, or solve that problem as long as you continue to manage it. But if that's the direction that the administration takes at that time, it really would be beneficial for the long-term interest of the city and those who live in the city.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Justin, Emily. That concludes this hearing for today. District City Councilor. Today is Tuesday, April 23rd. We are here regarding the FY19 budget proposal and related revolving funds this afternoon. Dockets 0568, 0569, 0570, 0571, and 0572. I need to read them into the record. 0568, message in order authorizing the Law Department revolving fund for fiscal year 2019 to purchase goods and services for repairs to city property. This revolving fund shall be funded by receipts from recoveries for damages to city property caused by third parties. The Law Department will be the only unit authorized to expend from the fund, and such expenditures shall be capped at $500,000. Docket 0569, message and order authorizing a limit for the Distributed Energy Resource Revolving Fund for fiscal year 2019 to facilitate the purchase offsets of greenhouse gas emissions which shall be associated with a portion of the electricity consumed by the city annually, and to operate, maintain, monitor, and expand the city's existing solar arrays and Boston Public Schools combined heat and power facilities. This revolving fund shall be credited with any and all receipts from the sale of renewable and alternative energy certificates and demand response program revenues produced by combined heat and power units located at Boston Public School sites and solar renewable energy certificates produced by the city's photovoltaic arrays. Receipts and resulting expenditures from the fund shall not exceed $250,000. Docket 0570, message and order authorizing a limit for the Mayor's Office of Tourism revolving fund for fiscal year 2019 to purchase goods and services to support events and programming on and around City Hall Plaza to advance tourism and promote participation in public celebrations, civic and cultural events. This revolving fund shall be funded by receipts from payments for the use of City Hall Plaza pursuant to City of Boston Code Ordinance 11-7.14. The Mayor's Office of Tourism will be the only unit authorized to expend from this fund, and such expenditures shall be capped at $150,000. Docket 0571, message and order authorizing a limit for the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture revolving fund for fiscal year FY 2019 to purchase goods and services to support public art to enhance the public realm throughout the city of Boston. This revolving fund shall be funded by receipts from easements within the public way granted by the Public Improvement Commission. The Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture will be the only unit authorized to expend from the fund, and such expenditures shall be capped at $150,000. And finally, 0572, message and order authorizing a limit for the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture revolving fund for FY 2019 to purchase goods and services to support the operation of the Strand Theater. This revolving fund shall be funded by receipts from rental fees for the use of the Strand Theater. The Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture will be the only unit authorized to expend from the fund, and such expenditures shall be capped at $150,000. I'd like to remind folks this is a public hearing. It is both being broadcast and recorded on RCN Channel 82, and RCN Channel 8, Verizon 1964. I'd ask folks to silence any electronic devices. At the conclusion of the presentation and question and answer period, we will take public testimony. There's a sign-in sheet to my left. Please state your name, any affiliation, and if you do wish to testify. This budget review will encompass over 36 hearings over roughly the next month and a half. We strongly encourage residents, whether here in the chamber or at home, to take a moment to be engaged in this process by giving testimony for the record. You can do this in several ways. Come to one of the hearings and give public testimony. Come to the hearing dedicated to public testimony on Tuesday, June 5th, anytime from 2 to 6 p.m. Send your testimony to the Committee on Ways and Means, 1 City Hall Plaza, Boston City Hall, 02201, or email the committee at ccc.wm@boston.gov. I'd like to introduce my colleagues in order of their arrival. To my left, City Councilor at Large Anissa Sabi George. To my right, City Councilor Matt O'Malley. Who came in after that? Councilor Flynn, Councilor Janey, and then Councilor Flaherty. Thank you. And I'll hand it over to Dawn for your opening remarks.
So the law department is in charge of what we refer to as the third-party property damage fund with a total authorization of $500,000. So basically, the law department's involvement with this fund is to collect insurance monies, monies from individuals, or even cooperating with the district attorney's office to seek restitution on matters where city property has been damaged. So what we do is we file claims or lawsuits in order to recover money for damage to city property. Then it goes into this fund, is essentially kind of earmarked per department, and then the departments can request to use that money in order to either replace or repair the property that was damaged.
Great. Can you just give us a quick example of, a scenario that comes up maybe more than just occasionally?
Sure. So I actually have two kind of different examples. The usual example would be a police cruiser that's damaged in a car accident, and we know who the other party is. They usually have insurance coverage. We just file an insurance claim against them, and then pretty quickly we usually receive the funds. And then that would go into this fund, and then the police department would be able to purchase another vehicle or possibly repair that vehicle with those funds. Or they could actually use the money for something in like kind, but maybe not specifically for replacing that vehicle.
Right.
So if they wanted to buy like a patrol vehicle instead of a cruiser, they could do that as well. Another example, which has actually come up several times, is when trees are damaged, sometimes by people cutting them down when they shouldn't, or moving vehicles backing into them. So we actually will file a claim, let's say against U-Haul or something like that, because they have insurance, and we receive the money for the value of the tree, which is a specific formula that the Parks Department comes up with and provides us with. And then sometimes when it's an individual, we kind of pursue those cases on a case-by-case basis, asking, why did you cut it down, and are you willing to provide any compensation to the city for that? So there's no insurance coverage for the tree example, but there would be for if it was a U-Haul type situation.
Gotcha. Councilor Asabi George?
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned that this fund is earmarked per department, capped at $500,000. So how much money is in each of those earmarks?
So it's basically a one-for-one. If we receive $1,000 from a claim where a police vehicle was hit, then that $1,000 would be available for the police department to use.
Is it used pretty quickly?
When we first started doing this several years ago, the departments weren't using it as much, but now I think everybody's on board and is really excited about having the funds available to use. So
So it's more actively revolving?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
That's it for me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Flynn? Oh, and let me recognize that we've been joined by Councilor Tim McCarthy.
I have no further questions at this time.
Thank you. Councilor O'Malley?
I'm good, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Councilor Janey?
No questions, thank you.
Okay. And Councilor Flaherty?
Chairman, just want to, through the chair, just ask you how many, on average, how many accidents occur with respect to city vehicles? And also, what's the law department's role in that?
Sure. So I don't have the exact figure on the number of accidents, let's say, per fiscal year, but I can provide that if you'd like.
Sure.
What time period would you like?
Sure. Just say within the last couple of years. We just want to get a snapshot. I think it's important.
Okay.
And then,
just for police vehicles?
Just city vehicles in general.
City vehicles. Okay.
You want to sub it out as, you can do police vehicles, but I'm curious to see transportation vehicles, school department vehicles, parks department vehicles, anywhere where.
It is quite a few. I would say in a week, we could have 1 to 5, depending on what happens.
And then the law department's role in terms of they're involved with insurance companies, sort of handling who's at fault, that type of stuff. Are they also involved in reviewing the contracts for the vendors?
Not at all. We're only involved in pursuing negligence claims, whether it's filing with the insurance company or filing a lawsuit. Anything after that, if they ask me personally, because I'm the one who does it, I refer them to their budget analyst, and we don't deal with any outside vendor contracts or anything. That's each department.
And then I assume that the attorneys upstairs, they sort of have a checklist of things that they're either looking for or asking for throughout the process?
Yes, so again, it's just me personally. I do all of these types of claims, and yeah, we want to make sure that we have a figure and documentation, police reports to back up what our claim is. And if I don't have that, then we do not pursue a claim.
Gotcha. And then obviously a prompt response, either by phone call or email, is sort of, I guess, mandated by your position dealing with all these insurance companies and vendors and.
Right, so immediately we send out a notice of claim and a demand with the amount. Even if we don't have the amount right then, we'll put pending, and then we'll update it later, so we let them know right away. And insurance companies are pretty responsive to these types of claims, so we do hear from them.
And in the instance where litigation is to follow, is that something that you do handle the litigation part, or do you make a decision, or the law department makes a decision to send that out to outside counsel?
As far as I know, we've never sent any what we call affirmative recovery litigation to outside counsel. Myself and my supervisor, Susan Weiss, would be involved in consulting each other to determine whether we should pursue legal action, and then that is handled within the law department.
And then does that take it now outside of the scope of the revolving fund, and then that goes into the execution of court funds?
No, so if the claim then goes into litigation and money is received during that litigation, it goes into the same fund,
Interesting.
this
Okay.
fund.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councilor Malley.
Just briefly, when a city vehicle, hits a mailbox or a fence, causes damage to an individual's home, there's an appeal process that's filed with the city clerk where someone can get restitution for the damage caused by a city vehicle. Does this money help allocate that, or is this a completely different pool?
No, this is different. So the type of scenario that you just stated would be just a regular claim that someone would file against the city that would be handled in the claims division.
Okay.
Which is the same people, but we have claims and then we have recovery.
Understood. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
Now we'll move on to docket 0569. Joe?
Good afternoon, councilors. My name is Joseph LaRusso. I'm a member of the Municipal Energy Unit in the Environment Department. I'm the city's energy finance manager. And I'm here to testify on behalf of the Distributed Energy Resource Revolving Fund. This revolving fund would receive as revenues the proceeds of the sale of solar renewable energy credits and alternative energy credits, as well as demand resource revenues. The city has 2 photovoltaic arrays, one on top of the Archives Building at 201 Rivermore Street, the other on top of the roof at the Central Maintenance Facility at 401 Frontage Road. They produce solar renewable energy credits. The school department has a number of combined heat and power units in their schools. And those units produce two kinds of revenues. They produce alternative energy credits, and they also, currently two of their units, combined heat and power units, are also enrolled in ISO New England's demand response program. So they're receiving revenues for turning on in times when the entire regional electric grid is stressed. So these are generally the days when every air conditioner in New England is turned on and the grid is maxed out and is stressed. ISO New England, which is the electric grid operator, will put out a call to each entity that's enrolled assets to turn on their generators, and the combined heat and power units are turned on at that point. The idea here is that when that notice is put out and all of those assets are turned on across the region, in the aggregate, they avoid the need to turn on peaking plants that are generally run by oil. So it's a cleaner alternative to support the electric grid when it's stressed.
Great.
I should add that the expenditures out of the fund would be used to support the assets that are in fact producing the revenues. So the SREC and AEC revenues and the demand response revenues would be used to operate and maintain the photovoltaic arrays and the school department's CHP units, the combined heat and power units.
What kind of costs are you looking at, Joe, for annual basic maintenance and such?
Well, I know that the school department has a contract for O&M for their CHP units that's $500,000 a year, so it would far exceed the cost of, the amount of the revenues that would be coming into the fund. The hope is that in the future, we'll be able to enroll more of the school department CHP units in order to accrue more alternative energy credit revenue and more demand response revenue, and to, further supplement, and support those units with these revenues that the units themselves would be generating.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, there's a $500,000 maintenance budget for all of the
Right.
solar and various arrays, photovoltaic, et cetera.
Well, not for the photovoltaic arrays. The photovoltaic arrays are non-BPS assets.
Okay.
The $500,000 contract is for operations and maintenance for the combined heat and power units the school department owns. For the SREC revenue expenditures, we're talking about the cost of monitoring and maintaining them. Generally, there are not very many costs associated with photovoltaic arrays. They're no moving parts. The most vulnerable part of the photovoltaic array is the inverter. The panels themselves produce electricity. That electricity is generated in DC. The inverter changes it to AC so that it can be used inside the buildings. So the monitoring expenditures are generally, very low, and what we're really planning for with the SREX and using this revenue for is those contingencies that are unforeseen, like an inverter failure or something like that. The requirements for the combined heat and power units are more predictable because they're essentially large engines. They're called combined heat and power units because they're used primarily to generate heat. And so they, as an additional benefit, also act as generators. And so in addition to producing the heat, they're also producing electricity. So the school department is avoiding the need to purchase electricity from Eversource because they're generating a certain amount of the electricity right on site.
Right. Okay. Council, good? Councilor Flynn?
Thank you, Council Samuel. I had one quick question. Is there any way to work closely with BHA residents in public housing to improve energy efficiency, quality of life as it relates to heating and air conditioning? Would your office be working on that type of initiative?
We don't directly support the BHA, but we do work fairly closely with their staff. We've engaged in a lot of information sharing with them. They've done a great deal of energy efficiency on their own, and whenever we do identify opportunities to do on-site renewable energy, we also share information with them about installing more on-site renewables, and they do the same for us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Joe. Always good to be with you. This is obviously of great interest to me, and it's further proves the point that I often make that every fiscal conservative ought to be an environmentalist because, as you can see, we can generate money. Have you seen a fluctuation in the price of SRECs over the last year?
Not really. They've been fairly stable.
Yeah.
The price does fluctuate over time. I actually have an array on top of my house, so I actually occasionally get checks for the small number of SRECs that I produce. But I've seen them as high as $380. And more recently, they've been in the $280 range.
Fantastic. That's great. And how many schools have the CHP units currently?
That's a good question. I can read off the list if you like.
Ballpark, and I apologize if this is...
I would say I think there are 16.
16, okay.
Yeah, and there are, some of the schools are multiple units. So I think that there are more than 20 units.
Okay. And as we go through the build BPS, is this sort of going to be on the checklist of new facilities, do you see?
To be honest, Councilor, I don't know, but I don't believe that there's any intention to remove any of the units, and I don't believe that there is at this time any plan to add additional units.
I'm sorry, you don't believe there's any
plan to add additional units?
Okay. What about our PV sort of portfolio. We have basically two buildings.
That's right, two
The-
buildings.
One in my district, one in, I believe, Councilor Janey, or perhaps Councilor Baker's district down on Frontage Road. Is there talk about expanding that, number of solar panels we have?
Yes, the plan now is to deploy more solar through the Renew Boston Trust program. I can go into a description of the Renew Boston Trust program if you like.
Just give us sort of the Reader's Digest version. Because I want to be respectful. We have a number of things to get through. But
Sure.
suffice it to say, I want to see PV panels on top of every building in Boston that can support them. Obviously, not every building can. So what in this body 3 or 4 years ago, and we've talked about this before, Joe, was able to pass some state funds that would put them PV panels to help run emergency equipment in Curtis Hall in Jamaica Plain, in maybe the Jackson Man, I think, in Alston Brighton, and in Dorchester, and that we haven't seen movement on that. So how do we get more of our solar infrastructure in the city?
Well, as I said, I think, the plan now is to do more solar through the Renew Boston Trust. This program has been developed over the course of the last 2 years. It's in the process of being implemented now. It was originally thought that the city itself would enter into power purchase agreements, the PPA agreements. That's a third-party arrangement. The city would contract with a PV developer. The city itself wouldn't own the PV that was installed. The developer would install the equipment and own the equipment that would be on top of the roofs. The city would merely execute a contract to purchase the power generated by those solar arrays. The plan is now to execute PPAs, but through our ESCO partner in the Renew Boston Trust.
So what does that mean in terms of a timeline? A year from now, are we going to have 4 buildings? Are we going to have 4 additional buildings? Are we going to have 1 additional building?
I know that the first transaction under Renew Boston Trust is expected to be completed in late May.
Late May, a month from now.
Late May, a month from now. And construction should start in July and be an 18-month construction schedule. And I believe in that first tranche of buildings that are going to be touched by the Renew Boston Trust program, I believe there are 3.
Great. And to be clear for those that are watching, so when we go through a third party, this means the city taxpayers don't put any money up. No money comes from our checkbook to fund these things. These will be funded privately, and the city will then get the benefit of ideally and eventually free electricity to run city buildings.
Not free. We'll be paying the developer, for the power that we take from the panels.
Yeah.
But we should be paying less than we would be paying for each kilowatt hour we purchase from the developer. We should be paying a price that is less than what we would be paying.
And we'll be using renewable energy sources.
That's correct.
And this will dovetail nicely with our work to bring community choice aggregation to Boston, because we have a paucity of renewable energy sources and infrastructure. So anything we can do to expedite this, we stand ready, willing to help. Thank you, Joe, for your good work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Janey?
Yes. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
You mentioned 16 schools earlier. How were those schools chosen?
Councilor, I don't know. The units were originally installed in the mid-2000s, and they were installed as part of a program to get those schools where the CHP are sited now were originally fueled by fuel oil, heated by fuel oil, and I know that at the time they were converting to natural gas, and the school department worked with National Grid in order to deploy these assets, because these CHP units are run off of natural gas, and they used that occasion as the opportunity to install these units. So I think it may have just been a matter of schools that were migrating off of fuel oil for heating to gas for heating, and it may not have been any more logical than that.
Okay, and just to clarify, in terms of build BPS, there aren't any plans to expand?
I can't say that for a certainty. I can find out, but I have not heard of any plans specifically to increase the number of combined heat and power units through Build BPS. I can confirm that if you like.
Thank you.
Councilor Flaherty.
Yeah, just asking as to whether or not the city's tracking gas leaks in and around school properties. And if so, what happens when you detect? So the example I'm using is sometimes we smell it, but it doesn't register a certain number with the entities to go fix it. But I think that if we get gas leaking in and around a school building, I think that's of paramount importance to get that leak fixed.
I would have to ask my colleagues in the Environment Department who would be responsible for that. Council, I'm afraid I don't know.
Okay.
offhand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All set? Thanks, Joe. I think
Okay.
I will conclude these two dockets. Can we bring in the Mayor's Office of Tourism and Arts and Culture? Thank you. Thanks for your testimony. Cap, basically capital. Hi. Hi. Who wants to take it away first? Mayor's Office of Tourism,
Sure,
Ken?
sure.
Welcome back.
Thank you so much. It's good to be back.
Yeah.
So the program, the purposes of the fund that we have right now is to purchase goods and services to support events and programming on or around City Hall Plaza, to advance tourism, promote participation in public celebrations, civic and cultural events from lease revenue we received from the rental of City Hall Plaza. That's basically what we, all the events that come, they put into the fund. It's capped at $150,000, and we put on.
Right. Oh, I'm sorry, I was just going to say, such as the Big Apple Circus, such as the Winterfest and other events such
Yep.
as that. Puerto Rican Festival now
Puerto
as
Rican
well.
Festival. There's Boston Pizza Festival, Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, the Forbes Under 40 event that happened Labor Day weekend. We also did Screen Gems. It was a movie production that we had out there. So those are the types of events that we have that would put money into that fund.
Right. And it's, I'm just surprised 150,000 seems kind of low for all those, especially with the garden event, the Winterfest event now. That seems like a big production.
We haven't yet gotten any money from that. We're just waiting for Treasury to deposit that into the account.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that negotiation was just been going on.
Great.
So we'll get that money in.
Will we get it this fiscal year or for next fiscal year?
It'll be for this one.
For this
Yeah.
fiscal year, great. Do you have any ballpark of what that fee will be?
I think it's around 50,000.
Okay,
I think
great.
that's what it is, but I'm not 100% sure on that, but I can check on that for you.
Great. Okay, great. I just want to recognize we've been joined by Councilor Josh Zakum as well. Councilor Asabi George?
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Flynn?
Thank you, Councilor Siomo. I just had one, I guess not a question, but more of a comment. I know the certain veterans organizations, Operation Stand Down, also was on City Hall Plaza, and the mayor had probably his greatest accomplishment, I think, was ending chronic homelessness. But it's also a credit to your department in allowing veterans groups to use the plaza, providing great services to homeless veterans. And so I just want to say thank you for what your department has done, helping our veterans across the city, especially our homeless veterans, and just would encourage you to keep up that great work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Mel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Guys, great to be with you.
Councilor?
When are the puppies coming to City Hall Plaza?
I just actually read this on Boston.com. I checked that today. It opens May 5th.
All right.
And it's on Wednesdays.
And these are dogs that will be up for adoption?
Yes, from
So-
what I understand.
I believe it's a Dedham-based rescue organization, which is great because, of course, this body passed the puppy mill bill, and we will only allow, we won't allow commercially bred pet stores, but to have adoption is a great thing. And I think this is wonderful, and I really have seen such an invigorated use of City Hall Plaza that it's wonderful. You know, it's been great to spend our lunch hours out there and to see activity and vibrancy happening. And you know, I say it somewhat with a smirk, but I really think it's a great idea that we're using that, and people love dogs, and I think, you know, it'll be nice in between council hearings on the budget to go see a little four-legged Fred.
And you can adopt one.
And to the chairman's point, which I think is a good one too, to increase the authorization, the $150,000, does that have to go through the council to set that?
There was a letter that was from the mayor to you guys.
Yeah, but Mr. Chairman, so we set the
Yes.
number.
Right.
So, and that's something that probably we should be looking at.
Authorize the appropriation up to.
Up to. So to increase that, that would just be
It would have to
changing
go-
our
yeah, we'd have to go
language.
through it.
Okay, I think that's something we obviously should do, because there is so much more activity happening, and it's great, generating revenue for taxpayers, so thank you both. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Janey?
Just building on that theme, I think there's so much great programming on City Hall Plaza. It's been a ghost town for years and years and years, and so the activation of the space is a welcome addition, and certainly makes this building much more friendly for residents. This amount is a low number, so I wonder if there are opportunities to generate more revenue, to do much more programming. In terms of the programming, the Donna Summer concert,
Donna Summer
the
Disco?
skate
Yep.
party, that's with this money here?
Yep. Correct.
Gospel Fest, things like that. Okay, so one question I have, those are two great examples. I love those, and I'm sure there are, so many other events. And I'm just wondering what your office does to really promote the events, to make sure that they're welcoming, that they're, very inclusive,
Yep.
not just to tourists who are visiting our city, but to residents.
Well, our tourism website has just been updated, so they're all promoted via social media. We have a person up in the office, Renee, who does all that through Twitter, for our Facebook account, with the Tourism Sports Entertainment account on bostoncity.gov. And we also work with our partners. We work with the State Tourism Office. We work with the Greater Boston CVB, so they promote our events as well on their sites.
So, I imagine if I'm a tourist visiting Boston, I would check those sites. But if I live in the city, I'm not going to the tourist website. So are you partnering with the Office of Neighborhood Services to kind of get the word out? How are we making sure that residents are also aware and taking advantage of the good programming that's happening?
When people come in and they're promoting those events, we'll bring in the neighborhood services and we go and meet with them. We tell them the things that are going on. And on the site as well that we have, we just put every single neighborhood in the city on the website with contact information, and we could direct those contacts to go onto our site so we could promote it.
Mm-hmm.
So we work very closely with neighborhood services.
And in terms of the money that is used to purchase goods and services for the different events, how many of those are MBEs or WBEs?
I don't assume.
Oh, I'm sorry. How many of those are minority business enterprises or women-owned businesses?
I can get that. I'm not sure what that is, but I can get that for you.
That would be helpful.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Councilor Flaherty.
Mr. Chairman, good to see you, and look forward to working with you, Director. I concur with my colleagues. The 150 seems like a paltry number, given the number of events. So, Director, how many events take place annually at City Hall Plaza?
Oh, now it's probably with the Winter Garden out there now, which we didn't really have anything. I would probably say somewhere around maybe 50.
And that also includes all of the cultural flag raisings and what have you. So, all right. And then, what portion of the 150 goes towards the property management department? I think so. It's my understanding that when you say, for example, the flag raisings, like property management and the property management employees are out there preparing the plaza as well as City Hall security.
Correct.
Is that covered under the 150, or is that completely different?
No, that's covered.
It is, okay. And then from the employees, from particularly things that happen on the weekend, like the Pasta Fest for the marathon, those, I would assume that that's either time and a half or double time or comp time. It just seems that it doesn't, I don't know how we're going to be able to, I don't know how we stretch the 150 is, I guess the point of my inquiry, but if that 150 covers all those staff employees.
Oh, no, no, no.
Okay.
No, that doesn't, no, that's,
Okay.
that's totally separate.
Okay.
I misunderstood your question.
Gotcha. So the 150 supports the events.
Exactly.
In which, I guess,
The
which shape or
150,
form?
the 150 would be an event that's going to be on those 3 days or more. There's a
Okay.
certain fee that
3
they're
days.
charged to be on the plaza.
Okay.
And that number, that amount of money goes into the revolving fund. That's where that money comes from.
Gotcha. And then as far as like the employees, whether it's City Hall security guards or whether it's property management employees who are tasked with sort of just
Right.
being present and performing their function, that doesn't come out
No,
of the
no,
150?
that would be property management. We wouldn't
Gotcha.
handle any of that at all.
Very good.
And as far as all of our staff, that when we're out there, we're out there for work, so.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you, Director. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Council McCarthy?
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, welcome. There's a captain on the ship, that's nice. I just have a quick question regarding the Winterfest. I know there was, a reading more about it. I thoroughly enjoyed the Winterfest. My wife and I and boys went there a couple times and enjoyed it very much. But I know there was some things in the different papers. There was some hiccups at the end. Can you just kind of address those and see where we're going?
I don't have those answers for you because
Okay.
the contract with the Winterfest and TD Garden and those is directly with property management.
Okay.
They negotiated that contract, so I wasn't privy to it. I've asked to look at it, and I'll be getting a copy of that.
Great, thanks. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Councilor Zachem?
I think you and my colleagues have done a fine job, Mr. Chairman, of asking any of the questions I would have had, so thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Zachem. Now we're going to move on to dockets 0571 and 0572. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. Hi, Karen. Hi, Bridget.
Hi, I'm Bridget Brown, and I'm the Director of Administration and Finance for the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture. I oversee the revolving funds in that office. There are 2 revolving funds. I guess the youngest revolving fund is the Strand Theater revolving fund, which was just initiated last year, and went through a process of implementation, which required hiring staff, setting up an account, obtaining existing and outstanding rental and rental fees, and then using those fees to take care of expenses that were necessary for the Strand. Currently, we've brought in $80,000 in rental fees, and we've spent $30,000. And the expenses range from staff salaries. The part-time workers, they basically pay taxes. They pay into the mandatory OBRA coverage. It also pays for security fees. It pays for stagecraft materials like lighting and gel and anything that's necessary for shows to be successful. Next year, this year is the 100-year anniversary of the Strand Theater. And now that we're up and running and we have this revolving fund and we have a bit of money, we'd like to take some of that money and use it towards special promotions for the centennial celebration. And also just really kind of, hopefully next year, we'd like to also build in our own programming, because right now, most of the programming, all of the programming at the Strand Theater is pretty much put on by the renters of the Strand. So we don't really have any control over any of the programming that takes place, and we would like to do that. So with the extra funds that we do have in the account that we obtained from outstanding fees, we'd like to use that to create our own specialized Strand programming, definitely heavily influenced by the people in the community. And the second revolving fund that we have is the Public Art Fund, and my colleague Karen Goodfellow can talk more about that.
Sure. Good afternoon, councilors. My name is Karen Goodfellow. I'm the director of the Boston Art Commission, as well as the Boston Air Program in the Mayor's Office of Arts and Agriculture. The revolving fund, as you well know, is being used to pay for expenses related to public art and any services related to public art. We primarily focus the spending for these monies on conservation of artworks, but we are hoping going forward in this next year to use some of it for services, to hire consultants to help us do some conservation planning and potentially some organizing around digitizing our collection.
Do you have any vendors in mind for the digitizing?
No, we'll be searching for that.
I just throwing this out there, the Horace Mann for the hearing impaired, they have a digitizing program that they've worked with the school department and the library department to digitize. It's something that I just put out there to pursue possibly. They're looking for the work too.
Okay,
So,
good, thank you.
Anybody else? Let me go around the horn. Councilor Flynn? Okay. Councilor Janey?
Could you tell me how the revenue is raised for these
From
revolving funds?
easements, public easements. So it was arranged through the Public Works Department. As you know, for the maintenance of artwork, we don't have a regular line for it, so this is a very useful source of funding for some planned projects. For example, we're hoping to repair some of we have 3 large portraits in the Charlestown Courthouse that are in need of repair. The word on the Dudley Library, we have an opportunity to conserve that, to move it during the construction and repair that. So projects like that are what the funds are used for, which we wouldn't otherwise have a source for.
And for the Strand, so I'm really excited about the 100-year anniversary. Usually there's like a planning process in the works. You know, something would have been in the plans last year or the year before. Is there some big grand celebration?
Well, we are planning a series of celebrations. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of money because the Strand, the money that we use to operate the Strand is basically based on our rentals. And so we are limited to the average of $75,000 that we bring in for the year. We do have a bit of a surplus from the outstanding rentals, which is about $20,000. So our intention is to host a series of events that would hark back to the original performances at the Strand. Like I think that there's going to be a vaudeville type performance. I think there's going to be like a night of jazz, and I think there's like live theater. But we would love to have a major celebration for this, the Strand, which has been in our community for 100 years. Unfortunately, we don't have the financial resources to do so. And last year, when the revolving fund was established, we didn't really have any money. And so, the idea of like planning a centennial was kind of like, oh, well, we'd like to, but we really didn't know how we were even going to do that without having a revolving fund or any money to begin with.
Now, is the Strand the only neighborhood-based theater left in our city?
City-owned, you mean?
Yeah.
City-owned? No, I
It's
don't
the
think
only one
so.
I can think of.
There's a theater in Hyde Park, is it?
Hyde Park?
Isn't there?
There are other neighborhood theaters, but
Okay.
it's the only one that the city of Boston owns, to my knowledge.
Oh, yeah, it's the one.
In terms of a celebration, is there an opportunity to have a partnership with some sort of private entity that could help with raising money?
Yes, yeah, there are definitely opportunities for that.
Is that something you're thinking about?
Yes, we are thinking about reaching out to consultants who might be able to help us with marketing and promotions.
And on the public art side, when it says here to purchase goods and services to support public art,
Right.
What exactly does that mean? Is that buying public, art for the public good?
Generally, no. So for the commissioning of artworks, we have other funding sources, like the new Percent for Art program. However, those funding sources don't generally come with money for maintenance and repair. So oftentimes, these funds from the revolving fund are used for that work, for which we don't have another source. And then also for the services, as I mentioned, being able to hire professional consultants to work with us in doing this work.
And how does the MLK Memorial fit into this, or does it?
In terms of public funds, other than my time and my colleagues' time, there are no public funds going toward that project. The fundraising for that, for the King Memorial, is all happening privately.
Right, but what about the maintenance of it?
So
So
we're
my
also
understanding is
planning-
that all that fundraising is just to commission the work, but then how will it be maintained?
The intention is for fundraising to happen for maintenance as well on that project. I do think that whenever we as a city take a public artwork into our collection, we do it with knowing that, sometime down the road, it may fall on us, right? Because these are objects that we'll have in 100, 200 years. So the responsibility is understood that ultimately it would come back to the commission, but on the King Memorial, we are planning on having fundraising for the maintenance happening privately.
And then last question, just on the public art side, Boston is so rich with just wonderful artists, all types of artists.
Yeah.
How are they able to kind of tap in to this?
So there have been times when we've had some money available through this to do temporary projects. So for example, last year we did a mural in partnership with the Office of Recovery Services on the Finland building. And so we were able to take some funds and use them toward that. So if we have more money in here, then we can potentially pay for some temporary projects, and artists would be able to access it in that way. But I will say we're also supporting the, arts community in Boston through the maintenance projects as well for those arts professionals.
Thank you so much.
Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor Sirmo. I'm just here to say thank you, ladies, for your work. And the hard work of frankly trying to find resources external to our budget to try to do some of the incredible events you want to happen. I know it's not easy work, so thank you, ladies, for the work, and thank you for being here today. Thank you, Councilor Sirmo.
Thank you, Councilor Campbell. Councilor Sabi-George.
Yeah. I just wanted to follow up just on a question that Councilor Janey was asking about the Strand Theater. Do we partner with any of our local universities who don't have theater space or could use the size of the Strand to do some of their performances?
No, we don't really do that type of partnership because the Strand is really rental-based, and I think in the future, like next year or so, we'd like to kind of build that into, our programming. We know that there's an institute at UMass Boston, and they have a pretty strong theater program, and there have been discussions with the general manager of the Strand and UMass, but nothing has really happened. I myself personally think that there are just all of these theater institutions and groups and organizations that we could certainly be partnering with. And I must say that we have engaged a foundation, the Krupp Family Foundation. They actually approached us and asked us about the Strand Theater, and we're curious about, programming that we might be able to provide, and wanted to know if we were interested in providing some kind of programming for the community. And they are actually giving us a grant of $10,000 and encouraging us to find a match so that we can actually put on community-based programs, programming that members of the community and organizations within the community can basically plan and design and implement, and not necessarily like a rental-based program.
Right. I would imagine that some of the universities could be good partners, especially ones that don't have their own theater.
Right. Yes.
And a more long-term, regular commitment from them. Thank you. That's it for me, Chair.
Thanks. Just a quick question. Who do you have as renters?
So our renters, the renters they're very diverse, right? So we'll have or performance organizations, like, for example, Company One, which is a theater company located in the South End. They're going to be renting the Strand this summer and putting on a production with high school students. They're also individuals. In December, acclaimed gospel singer Shirley Caesar performed at the Strand Theater, and it was, one individual who set it up. Right. So they're individuals, they're nonprofit organizations. It's very diverse.
Right.
Yes.
Well, that's great to hear, because I know just probably less than 15 years ago, it was vacant and abandoned for the most part, and now that it's being put to great use in the community and celebrating 100 years soon. That's great. Thank you.
And Counselor, I'd like to add one other thing that I didn't mention. So the Strand also, we just completed a major construction project at the Strand, which included the installation of an elevator. So now we have an elevator in the Strand.
Handicap accessible.
Yes,
Yeah, right,
yes.
great.
So
That's
it's
great.
accessible to everybody.
That's great. Thank you very much for your testimony today. That concludes today's hearings on dockets 0568, 0569, 0570, 0571, and 0572. This hearing's adjourned.